the TOOP Once Only Principal Project web conference. We're doing this online, completely virtual. I don't know if you've heard, but it's a little bit difficult for people to travel these days. So we are going online, and we thank you very much for attending this webinar, this morning webinar here. As many of you will know, the Once Only Principle is a European level initiative. It's all about storing citizens and business data once only, so that when citizens and businesses need to interact with the various governments, that there is not multiple sources of that data. Now, we have many individual countries already implementing such projects, and a lot of what the TOOP project about is making that work practically for businesses across European borders. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I want to welcome you. My name is Louis Zezeran. I am an Australian, but I am a longtime resident of the Republic of Estonia. It's a pleasure to be talking to you. In a former life, I was an enterprise integration consultant, and I did do training and consulting for the Estonian X-Road system back in the day. So the topics of the once only principle are indeed quite familiar to me. So I'm happy to be talking to you today. I'll be leading the discussions. We're having a panel session later on, and I'll also be posing the questions to the speakers. So let's move on. We have a few ground rules and a few things just to get across for you. So we're all trying this out. You know, the Zoom conferences, they're all a little bit difficult here. Connect audio. Hopefully you can hear us talking already. If you have questions, please put them into the chat in the WebEx there, and we have a team working behind the scenes. They're going to take those questions, work out what's happening, feed them back to me, and so I'll able to ask the presenters at the end of their talk. If you have problems, there is an account here, the CEF Building Blocks account. That's an account here in the WebEx. That's an account that you can message privately if you have the technical questions. So if there's something really difficult, then message them privately. And also, we are recording this. It's currently being recorded. If for some reason that poses an issue for you, please let us know. You can also talk to the CEF Building Blocks account or myself, and we can sort that out. Okay, let's do it. Enough from me. We have some opening remarks about the TOOP architecture. So I'd like to present our two speakers in just a moment. We have Professor Dr. Robert Krima, and Robert is a professor of e-governance at the Ragnar Norkse Institute for Innovation and Political Science here in Tallinn, Estonia, at TalTech, and his research focuses on e-governance and e-democracy. And our other speaker is Anders Goyen, and he's a legal and policy officer at the European Commission, working on implementation, enforcement, and revision of the e-IDAS regulation. Okay, gentlemen, please, we're going to unmute you, and you can take the floor.
Thank you, Louis. Welcome, everyone, out of Tallinn, Estonia, as you heard before. So my name is Robert Kremer. I'm a true European, born in Austria, having worked in Poland, and now ending up here in Estonia, not the end of the world, but rather the beginning of a digital transformation that has been ongoing for quite a while. Please, next slide. So as has been put forward by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, this should be Europe's digital decade. Yeah, and she actually puts out that digital Europe should be the answer to getting rid of 80% of industrial data that's never used. And rather, we would want to have a way of reusing information, of actually being able to link rather than to copy information. Next slide, please. So the once only principle is the idea to collect and store data only once. So rather than really putting all this information all over Europe, having the possibility to link directly to the data so that we have automated data sharing eventually, to replace this redundant data collection with information requests, and actually with that having a much better data reliability. Most recently, I have had the lucky to welcome a new member to my family. And when I was doing all the administrative work back home with my Austrian authorities, I still had to provide the numbers of the documents. I had to provide the names. I had to provide copies of the documents here in Estonia. And in the future, this should all be possible to do that in one integrated system and actually being able to provide the information from the Estonian authoritative databases to the Austrian systems, and through that enabling cross-border data exchange that's reliable and trustworthy. Please, next slide. So the TOOP project is essentially this piloting large-scale undertaking that tries to explore and to demonstrate how this could happen. So that we can actually have the possibility to have time savings for public administrations, for businesses, to lower the administrative burdens and the cost, and to improve the service quality and the public sector efficiency. And of course, and coming from a German-speaking country, you're not surprised, we want to make sure, we made sure that we're compliant with data protection legislation, as that is really something that's true to our heart. So security, interoperability, data quality, and user-friendliness were part of the design process so that we actually contribute to this better functioning and actually functioning digital single market. We're doing so in the form of a Horizon project, which is our funding source. So obviously we have some boxes to tick, and that's our deliverables. And you will hear later today through some of the presentations what we have actually already accomplished and how we are going to put and contribute to the functioning of all the data exchange. When I go back in my mind now and take myself to the very beginning of our project, when I was first approached, it's pretty much 5 years ago, then we had a couple of things not really in place yet, right? So we didn't have the groundbreaking single digital gateway regulation, which you will also hear later about. We also didn't have the Tallinn Declaration that really provided a commitment, even had our own section on the once only principle, really enabling this transformation for cross-border e-government. Next slide, please. So this all wouldn't have been possible with such a strong support all across Europe. We had some 23 beneficiaries from 23 countries, from both member states of the European Union as also associated countries. And altogether, we have more than 50 partners in about half in public administrations, about 1/3 in universities, and about the rest coming from companies that all work together in making this a reality. And we started in January of 2017, and we're going to end in January 2021, so in something like 4 months from now. Next slide, please. So we had 4 major goals. So to explore and to demonstrate that the once only principle actually works, to show that cross-border data exchange is a possibility. So we're not only integrating data within a country, but we're actually providing it to entities, to data consumers outside of the original public administration. With that, we allow to reduce the administrative burden. And as this project started out, it was really focusing on business and public administrations in order also to find a good way to integrate the data protection. Next slide. So how do we provide the impact? So we implement and contribute to the key eGov and public administration strategies in the European Union. We impact through time savings and cost reductions, through our pilots, which you will hear more about by a presentation from our piloting manager, Leftes Leontaridis, how they are scalable and can be extended later on, that we actually got an idea on how OOP cross-border can work, and so that we can also expand on this, but also contribute to the European framework standards and guidelines, as we will also be handing over later today. So for future eGov pilots and setting up of once only principle solutions, we'll be able to reduce the cost. So what did our pilots succeed with? Next slide, please. We had 11 member states that did active piloting in the general business mobility piloting area. We had 7 partners that completed all the piloting milestones, and we will still have more coming on until the very end of the project. We have an active collaboration with the Connecting Europe facility, with the Business Register Interconnection Service, with ISA Square, and with the Assertis, and we're really talking directly with them and actually making it possible that we could hand over our results directly to the European Commission, which we will do later today. So we are licensing them under the European Union license, EUPL, and we share them with the Commission and the Member States for validation. And we will further provide more handover opportunities until the end of the project. We will also intensify our piloting activities in the piloting domain of e-procurement. Next slide, please. And we developed a reference architecture that is even further being improved, and it's used in all the piloting domains. We'll align them until the end of January 2021. And we have developed a methodology for our sustainability plans, and we're going to provide sustainability to all of our piloting areas and technical artifacts, and we're finalizing them by the end of the project. So let me give you this outlook for today, where we're going to several points. Next slide, please. We have the single digital gateway regulation. That is a key cornerstone policy development that actually gave the TOOP project an immense push, and also presented a challenge that we had to reorient our project towards and actually actively adopt it. That will not only provide businesses with a better integration of the digital single market, but also the citizens. We'll also support the Your Europe portal, where we have the access to information, procedures, and assistance services that will boost the digital single market. And TOOP and its results will provide the input and support for the European e-identity, which was also announced or promoted by Ursula von der Leyen earlier this month. And we will have a long-term sustainability of our results on the one hand side directly through the European Commission, and an own sustainability organization, onesonly.org, which you will hear more about later on. With this, I would like to already hand over to our Policy Officer, Anders Gjörn, from the European Commission, that has been accompanying our project throughout. Anders, or back to you, Louis, and then to Anders. See, coordinators, they always want to coordinate.
That's all right. Anders, are you there, my friend?
I am here, so I'm ready to.
Sure. I think, Anders, just before we move on, sir, just a quick one. We had a quick question for you, Robert, just so we get it inside of the context. It was asked, what European universities are partnering in the TOOP initiative? Unmute, Rob.
Yep. Muted myself, yes. So we have several universities that are involved in that, from Greece, for example, University of the Aegean, University of Piraeus. We have the University of Koblenz involved. We have, of course, our Tallinn University of Technology, and we have several other partners like the Luxembourg Institute of Technology, LIST. And bear with me if I'm not going to remember all of our partners, but those are a couple that representative for the whole consortium. And the full list can be accessed on our toop.eu website.
Lovely. Thank you, sir. Okay, Anders, sorry about that. We're just getting some questions in there. Please take it away.
So, good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Perhaps you can see me as well. In any case, my name is Anders Gjörn. I am indeed, or have been, the project officer for the TOOP project for some years. As others here on the call, I'm not from the EU neither. I'm a Norwegian citizen, but having had the pleasure of working in and for the European Commission for 20 years, working and living in Brussels and Luxembourg. So I think the project is not only close to my heart personally, but I know it's very close to the heart of DG Connect, who's been behind or the TOOP project and managed to, let's say, foresee its funding. So as you know and presented, TOOP is a large-scale pilot and a series of large-scale pilots that has been funded at the EU level to support the development of cross-border digital public services in the EU. And I think that like previous large-scale pilots, such as eSense and PEPL and eCodex and Stork, I think it's fair to say, Robert, and to all colleagues, that TOOP has really been a success. So I think from that point of view, it's easy for me as representing Connect here today to welcome you. So looking a bit back on the side of the Commission and DG Connect, we conceived the support of your project to enable the implementation of the once-only principle at the EU level. At the time, the once-only principle was, at least at the EU level, a brilliant principle. At the national level, already I think it had been shaped and implemented slightly, I think, in various administrations to support the reduction of administrative burden. But at the EU level, it floated as a wonderful principle, talked about in places like Malmo, in the Malmo Declaration, and mentioned in various e-government action plans. We had also on the side of DG Connect funded a number of studies looking at the impacts and feasibility of applying the principle, but we hadn't done anything. We hadn't sort of, put the money where it belongs to see if it was really feasible to indeed create such an infrastructure. So when TOOP started in January 2017, the aim, as you said, Robert, was through various use cases to look at the feasibility of setting up such an infrastructure at the EU level. Of course, in January 2017, we should have known, but we did not know that at the same time the Commission was preparing a regulation, the Single Digital Gateway Regulation, that would really, I think, change the course of not only your project, but also our expectations. And I think the Single Digital Gateway Regulation has been a game changer, for us, member states and the TOOP project. And I also believe that the Single Digital Gateway Regulation, once it has been established, will also be a game changer for consumers and businesses. So welcoming you here today, I would also like to congratulate you on the project and the team in view of these changes for its flexibility and your ability to adapt to the changing circumstances. In the end, this has been really helpful to the Commission and member states to deliver the SDR-OP infrastructure. And I would dare to say that without the TOOP project, I think the SDR regulation or the future infrastructure would probably have been an infrastructureless. I do not believe that without your efforts, that the SDR would have been able to execute on delivering once-only technical infrastructure in 2023. So I think to conclude, Robert, everyone, and based on the outputs of your project, we are close to having an agreed technical framework for OP at the EU level. And well underway is also another large-scale pilot, the DE4A, benefiting from your excellent efforts. So with those words, Robert and the team, I would like to congratulate you for the result. And I'm looking forward to following efforts in other projects now in the future. Thank you very much.
Very nice. Thank you, Anders, and thank you to Robert as well for your contributions, these opening speeches here, and a few words just to set it up for us. So as we're moving on to our first main session of the conference, and this one is all about what did the project achieve? What has been done? And the way we're going to be doing that is we're going to be having two sessions right now. So if you're in Central European time, it's 9:20. So from 9:20 to 9:50, we're going to be talking about the TOOP architecture. And then at 9:50 to 10:35, looking at the member states' testimonials and success stories. And then something about 10:35, 10:40 at Central European time. We're going to have a little break and then having another session after that before we have another break. So this next 4 different topics are all about what has this project achieved. Okay, let's go on. It's the TOOP architecture. And to talk about the TOOP architecture, I'd like to welcome into our conference. We have Lefteris Leontaridis, and he's the TOOP piloting manager. And we also have Jerry Demetrio. He's also a TOOP architect. Gentlemen, are you there? Do we have a connection?
Yes, hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Is that you, Lefteris?
Yes, yes, this is
Lovely.
okay.
So, welcome. Okay, well, I'll leave it to you. Take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I will start with just an overview of the topics to be covered. The presentation is in three parts. The first is more conceptual. What did we actually do from the point of view of what is the functionality that we aim to achieve? And this is about looking at what we call the cross-border evidence exchange use case and a little bit of a thinking, our thinking behind it. Then the second part is more technical, not too technical, hopefully. It is about specifications and the standards that we used. And there was a lot of work the TOP did together with the Commission and with ICE as well, but also with CEF in order to not just reuse standards that were existing, but also to provide requirements so that these standards would evolve. And this work is still going on. And then the last part is about the top reference architecture, which is a more generalized view of what we did and in a way that can be reused for all different use cases in the future. So just to start the first part, okay, the next slide, please. Okay, we have to start from the top and in a hopefully more simplified way. When, as Anders said and Robert said, when we started TOP at the beginning of 2017, there was no SDG regulation, and we had to focus our thinking in what we would actually do and how we would approach the once-only principle. So the basics are here. So what are the main actors and what is the main setup? The way we saw it, and it took us quite some time to arrive at what here may look simple, but it took us like a year in order to arrive to this, is that what we always have, what we assume that we have a procedure that runs in a country, and that procedure runs in a system that we call the data consumer, and this runs in a country country A on the left, and then there is a user from another country that we call country B that is accessing that procedure. And in order to implement the once-only principle, this user will not be required to submit the evidences that this procedure on the data consumer country needs, but the data consumer will need to request these data, these evidences, whatever is needed to be fetched by the country of origin of the user. This user may be a natural person in the context of a procedure that is about citizens, or it might be a representative of a company in a procedure that is about business mobility. And we had mostly business mobility use cases in our project, but what we have built and what we have delivered works equally for citizens and for businesses. So it may look fairly simple, but actually it took us some time, and it was a journey. And now we can go into seeing this in more detail. So next slide, please. Okay, so how then we went about defining this exchange, this cross-border exchange? Well, the first step is always to know who the user is. So there is always the need for a data consumer system, the procedure to identify the user, the citizen or representative of the company from another country. Then need to build the request for the evidence, send this request to the data provider, and the data provider is the system that it's a base registry, or there's some kind of core database service of a country that can provide it, and then that system will build the response and send it back. In order to do that, though, there is a need to provide access to some core services, as we call them, which you will see as I go on. and which facilitate this data exchange by making sure that both parties, the data consumer and the data provider, know who is requesting what and why and how it can be sent. Next slide. This is an overview of the building blocks of the components. So there are some core services in the middle that are enabling this cross-border exchange, because we're talking about interoperability and the data consumer and data provider systems are in different countries. The environment is heterogeneous. In most cases, there is no harmonization, and this is why we need, let's say, intermediation and translation mechanism. So we have the core services, the set of components, the criteria and evidence type rule base, which is in charge of making sure that the data consumer data provider know that there is equivalence in the evidences that are being exchanged. And there's a data services directory where we can find who the data providers are and what they can provide. There's a register of authorities, which is where we can find who the data consumers are and what they are authorized to request, and the semantic repository. Then, of course, we use also part of the e-delivery infrastructure for dynamic discovery, BDXL, which is a core e-delivery service that is hosted by the Commission. Then there are some services that are deployed at member state level, such as the IDES nodes, of course, which exist in all the countries, and they provide the possibility to do cross-border authentication, strong authentication cross-border. And in the top flavor of the architecture, we have been using SMP, Service Metadata Publisher, which is registry of the endpoints in each country, and we use that for the discovery of the endpoints. And then, of course, a gateway of e-delivery, which exists in every country, and it is the way to exchange messages. In the member state systems, the data consumers and data providers. So data consumers are usually procedures, there are portals, government portals, there could be all kinds of procedures. And the data providers are the base registry. And these have implemented request and response according to TOOP EDM, which is the exchange data model. So that's the basic technological view. And next slide. A little bit more detail about the flow, just for you to take a flavor. Of course, it's a lot of detail underneath. So first step, as we said, is the identification. So the data consumer, the procedure identifies the user and then extracts the procedure requirements. So which is the data consumer is aware of what evidence are required for that particular user in that particular procedure. So the next step then is to identify the required evidence from the other country. And for that, there is access to the core services or criteria and evidence type rule base. The idea being that the evidences are not always harmonized. Actually, in most cases, they are not. So each procedure in a country, in a data consumer country, knows what are the national evidences, but these may not be the same in another country. So we need this, let's say, equivalence assurance mechanism to make sure that the data consumer knows which evidences to request from the data provider country. And the next step is to, when the data consumer knows what evidences to request, then has to discover which data provider, because it can be more than one according to the use case we have, like, for example, the maritime domain where we are requesting ship and crew certificates. It might be more than one data provider. So then the data consumer asks the data services directory, what is the data provider or providers that can provide this data set. Once this is discovered, then there is a technical step about discovering finding out what is the routing information, so where to actually send, what is the technical endpoint to send the message, and then the message will be built and sent. Before doing that, though, the data consumer according to the use case and the legal basis. But generally, we need to obtain an explicit authorization of the user to request this data. And this is how we make sure that the data protection requirements are fulfilled. So then the request is sent through e-delivery. The data provider receives it, processes it, and then there is a verification step. The data provider wants to verify that the data consumer is a legitimate authority which has a valid reason, a valid legal reason for requesting that evidence for that particular user. And this is done by the registry of authorities. Now, this is very much, this architecture is very much in line with what we have now in the CEF-OP and the SDG. Actually, the registry of authorities is something that was not in the original TOOP architecture. Original meaning the one that we had until the end of 2019. It was a very good suggestion by CEF-OP because TOOP was using another verification mechanism, but it was a good idea and was adopted. Those of you who may be familiar with the CEF-OP SDG architecture, you will see that it is very similar. The criteria and evidence rule base is now called the evidence broker, but other than that, it is very much in line. So next slide, just to complete the flow. So the data provider has received a request, so then it has to check whether the user exists, because it might be that there is no data about this particular user. As we know from the SDG, the data is exchanged only when the data exists, or it exists in a format and in a modality where it can be exchanged. So once the user exists, then there is a backwards flow where there is a response, and the response is sent to the data consumer. I won't go through the details, but there is a step there which the SDG regulation makes very explicit, where we have to provide the user with the ability to view the data and have an explicit consent for actually the data to be used. And once this is given, then it can be used by the data consumer. So, next slide. Okay, next session, next slide, please. I will just start here by saying that this is another view of the architecture where you see certain flows. We'll not go into details of each one of those, but this flows, these arrows here, these are interfaces, mostly from the member state systems to the core components or the core services, and the exchange between the gateways, which have been defined and specified by TOOP, and these flows are what has already been handed over to the Commission and is now being taken up by CEF-OP as a first basis for the SDG system. So with that, I would like to leave the floor to my colleague Jerry Dimitriou, who is head of the core components task force, which is the central, the core development team of the project. So Jerry, can you take us through the rest?
Thank you, Lefteris. So I will now describe a bit the technical specifications. So you saw from Lefteris' presentation that there are some core components that do provide to the infrastructure and facilitate the exchange of the messages of the requests and the responses between the DC system and the DP system. But in order to do this properly, you need to have some technical specifications. And the aim that we had in the architecture, in the solution architecture, is to be able to provide those interfaces and the data models inside those messages of the interfaces using as much as possible standards, pre-existing standards, and both on the data model level and on the protocol level. So in the middle with the green boxes are the central components in which the systems, the actual systems interact, the DC system and the DP system. You see that, for example, as a step one, we need to authenticate the user, and the protocol that we use for that is the EIDAS SAML profile. So we use the EIDAS node. The second step is how we use the criteria and evidence type rule base. So for that, the DC system needs to create a message using a REST API, which is defined in the SERB and the criteria evidence type rule base. But the data model itself is based on an ISA core vocabulary, or will be based on an ISA core vocabulary of the core criteria and core evidence, so the CCCEV. Then there is another interaction after that, in which we need to find and we need to discover which data providers are able to provide us, as being the data consumer, with the data, the evidence that we require. That's another protocol, that's another interface. And for that, we used the RegRep Oasis VergeRep version 4, and the model itself, the data model inside, is based on the BIREC DICAT AP profile of ISA. Continuing, then the DC system needs to submit the message to these data providers that it has discovered through the step 3, the DSD query. And we do this dynamically in TOOP. So we find the data providers, as we call it, SMP, Service Metadata Publisher, a federated component. The protocol for that is a specific REST API based on Oasis BDXR. And the data model is also based on Oasis BDXR. So another standard for querying the routing information for each data provider that we need to send. The submission then it begins from the DC system to the AS4 gateway. As you can see from this drawing, we have a 4-corner model. So the DC system does not directly communicate with the DP system, but rather we use Ceph AS4 in order to have reliable delivery of messages with integrity and all those non-functionals that are provided with the Ceph AS4 profile. So the DC system just forwards the message with the necessary metadata to the AS4 gateway, and then the AS4 gateway, using the Ceph delivery AS4 profile, and we are now in number 6, submits the message securely and reliably to the AS4, the target AS4, the AS4 gateway of the DP system. The AS4 gateway then validates, verifies the message for integrity, security, and privacy. So it decrypts and checks the signature, and then forwards this message to the DP system. The DP system needs to verify the data consumer. The data consumer is verified using the registry of authorities. And for that, we have a technical specification based again on the RegRep version 4 profile. But now the main, let's say, data model vocabulary is the CPSV AP. So the core public service vocabulary application profile of ISA. And then we go the other way around. So we are fetching the DC routing information. So it's the same because we're using the SMP protocols and data model Oasis BDXR. And we send the message reliably and securely again using Ceph delivery AS4. So you see that there are numerous interactions. And what we have achieved is that for each of those interactions with a different system, which might have even different topologies, we have used standards both on the data model layer and on the protocol layer. Now, next slide, please. We have then the semantic landscape. We said that the data model is based on core vocabularies. I'm shortly showing you here the actual landscape. So we use DCAT and DCAT AP. The ADMS, the CCCV, the BIREC DICAT AP, and the ISA core vocabularies of agent, person, and location. And the core part of our interoperability, our semantic interoperability, is what we call the dataset class, which I will show you also in a bit later. Next, please. Okay, so semantic interoperability. We have the semantic repository. It is based on the DCAT AP. We have the criterion evidence type rule base. The data model is based on the CCCV, the core evidence core criteria vocabulary. The data services directory, it's based on the BIREC DICAT AP. All those systems provide information in the message, in the TOOP, as we call the TOOP EDM, where EDM stands for Exchange Data Model. So the evidence request is based on the CCCV and uses structures of the CCCV, which also can be found in SERB, and the data provider metadata that are inside the TOOP EDM, the request and the response, is based on the BIREC DCAT AP. Also, the data subject, the data consumer are based on the core agent vocabularies, person, and location. So semantically, we are using as much as possible the core vocabularies provided by ISA for interoperability. So next slide, please. One core point of the new architecture is that since we are following the SDG, we need to define formally some notions. So we got these notions from the CCCV. We have the requirement, which is the central part. It's a condition or prerequisites that someone requests and someone else needs to meet. So we are requesting requirements to be fulfilled, and those are fulfilled by evidence. A requirement can be an information requirement. I'm just asking information. Criterion, which is something that I need to prove, something more complicated, and constraints. Constraint is that I'm putting some parameters on the information that I request. So I need, for example, to check that you are above 18. That is a constraint. So this structure, requirements, information requirement, criterion, and constraint is the formalization of how requirements should look like according to ISA CCCV. So next slide. This maps with the SDG procedure. You know that in SDG procedure, there is only one thing that they are called procedural requirements. And we are able to map. We saw that we are able to map some requirements to being criteria, some other requirements being information requirements, and some other requirements being constraints. So there is a mapping between the abstract procedural requirement that we find in SDG and the actual formalized requirements that we have in the CCCV. So next slide. On the evidence equivalence, we have what you see here. I'm going to go fast. Is that we have a central layer, which is the SDG EU domain that defines the top level criteria, which are common criteria and common information requirements. These are mapped to actual requirements and criteria for procedures that are executed either in member state A, a member state that executes a procedure, or a member state B that needs to provide the evidence. For each of these information requirements, we have mappings of evidences. These evidences can be documents, can be data, but we map this with evidences so that we know for each member state how a requirement is fulfilled. Because as you can see from the picture, we might have different situations. In member state A, both the criterion and the requirement is provided by a single evidence. There's only one evidence to provide this, while in a more sophisticated, more advanced member state B, you could have different kinds of evidences for different kinds of criteria and information requirements. Okay, next slide. All these are combined and are used in order to properly create a message to be exchanged. This is based on our EDM, Exchange Data Model. The EDM is a standards-based model that supports the exchange of evidences. It defines the messages exchanged, so the requests and the responses and the errors, what is contained, so the information entities contained in each message, and the transaction details, which is the type of query, what we are requesting. Are we requesting the data, the actual data themselves, the documents themselves, or the metadata, information about the data, and the type of requests, so document or data. So next slide. This is an overview of a request. So we have the query request, which is a message containing the required information of the query. And what we have as information requirements. This is what the data consumer constructs and the data provider needs to parse. So we have the data subject, so to whom the evidence is for. It can be a legal person or a natural person, and it is modeled after the core person and core business vocabularies of ISA. Then we have the data consumer, the actual system that needs to send the message, which is its details is based on the core agent vocabulary. A procedure, which is a simple code list. It will be provided by the SDG system. The requirement, what needs to be proven, why I'm asking these evidences, which is based on the core criteria and core evidence vocabulary, and of course the details of the query. So am I doing a data request? Am I doing a document request? or am I doing a document reference request? So meaning that I'm requesting only about the metadata of a specific document. And of course, there are some query information data, which are technical details, so I will skip those. Those are based on DCAT and the CCCV, but for technicality, I can skip those. And then for the query response, next slide, please. So the query response is what the data provider sends back to the DP. Information requirements. So we have the data provider details now, which is again expressed using the core agent. The response type, which means either I have a contained response, so everything that I need to provide to the data consumer is part of the message. Also, binary files, documents are part of this response. So this is a contained response. Or we have a reference response, which means I'm just providing the metadata. And if the data consumer needs more information or the actual evidence, then they need to ask this in the second step. And of course, the response metadata, which is based on DCAT and CCCV. Both the query response and the query requests are based on OASIS Redshift version 4 syntax binding, which is common, as you have seen, also for other parts of our specifications. For example, the Registry of Authorities protocol uses Redshift version 4, and the DSD uses Redshift version 4. So for more information, please next slide. We have published, this is a public wiki. We are now in version 2.1. And if you think it will help, you would go there and see in detail all the specifications that we currently have. So, Lefteris.
Thank you, Jerry. Let's go quickly to the next session, then next slide. We do have a reference architecture, which is a generalized view. And so in the beginning, we started top down, but then we went through the exercise that and the analysis that we presented to you, and then we went back up, and now we are revising the reference architecture to fit what is the end of the road. So just I'm mindful of time here. I don't think we should go deeply into this, just to say that we do have, and we are going to deliver at the end the final, meaning entirely updated part of the reference architecture. Just the next slide, please. Okay, I mean, these are the boring Archimate diagrams that you know for the business architecture. Jerry, you want to have a quick overview of the next 2 or 3 slides?
Yes, okay. So it's a top-down approach. So in the top overview, we have a top-down approach. We start with the business architecture. You see here that those are business processes, and we have business artifacts like the criteria, the list of evidence types, and some procedures that are described in high level. But as we go deeper, so next slide, we go a little bit more down to the information systems architecture. So you have that we have the data consumer, and it has specific functionality. So the user management functionality, evidence management, evidence retrieval, and we start mapping those with actual services. So you see in the purple layer how we are supposed to realize this. So we go top to bottom. And for example, for the data provider discovery, you see that we use the DSD. And for routing metadata discovery and message exchange, we use e-delivery and the core parts of e-delivery, offset e-delivery. And we also use the e-signature DSIs and the document parts of Ceph for many of our implementations. This is for the DC operational capabilities of the information system. And also we have a similar diagram for the DP. Next slide, please. So it is the same. So I'm just showing you for completeness. And of course, then there are some cross-cutting concerns like trust and security. So for the next slide, we show how we tackle security and trust establishment. There are multiple models when we talk about trust. TOPRA tackles and provides requirements and how those can be achieved. One of our initial trust establishment method was end-to-end trust. So we used data consumer certificate and data provider certificate that are part of a trust list or a PKI, and the messages were signed by the data consumers and the data providers. That's the end-to-end trust establishment. But there is also another kind of a trust which comes from ERDS. Next slide, please. Which is the broker trust using the AS4 gateways. So this is what it is being promoted, or is going to be used by the SDG. So this simplifies things a lot in terms of trust. Now the anchor of trust are the AS4 gateways, the gateways themselves, which act on behalf of the systems that are behind those gateways. So we have an architecture that supports both, shows how this can be implemented, and how are the relations and the interactions when also in terms of trust. So quickly, that's the part of the reference architecture.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. I already had some discussions in the chat. I think there were questions for the two of you. Good. Okay, good. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Lefteris, and thank you, Jerry, for your presentations this morning. All right, we will keep on going with our next session. We have no more questions going on in the chat there, which is fine. So our next session is the member state testimonials and success stories. And we have 3 of these testimonials. So I have Angard Mondorf from Germany and Walter Kongshaven from Norway.
Okay, I hope you hear me now, because the connection has been bad for the last minute. But
No, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Hans Ekstol. I'm from the Swedish Companies Registration Office, and some of my colleagues has worked in TOOP from the start and also in the previous ESENS. I'm also participated in the DE4A that Anders mentioned earlier. This is my testimony of our pilot. But I will start with some background. I think there are part of my presentation that I can skip because Robert talked about the same thing. But from the beginning, this was not so hard to detect, because there has been an e-government action plan in place since 2014. And there are quite obvious that the digital single market is the goal of all this. So if for us, it was quite easy to detect that the pilot for one single principle for business, and because we are the business register, that we wanted to participate. That one part of the background, and the other part which make it much more clear even was the Tallinn Declaration, which was signed by all the ministers of digitalization from the member states, and it's based on 7 principles, and one of them are the ones on the principles. So, and I don't think I have to explain the ones on the principle, because it has been done on the technical level right now. But report ones is used many times. That's the ones on the principle. So going into the TOOP project, I think Robert was into this, but I want to point at the second under bullet there, that we are also in it to meet the needs of our users, which are also cross-border users. We want to create real live e-services, and it was a big game changer when the additional assignment came on, being that TOP should be the technical system for exchange the evidence by SDG. I think TOP has done a great job, especially in the last 6 months. Okay, and you know about the starting point and things like that. So next slide. We are, of course, have worked in the general business mobility part of the pilot work packages, and we have focused on the business registration, but always looked upon the business registration as one part of the flow to start a business in a member state. The other part is the tax application. In the Swedish consortia, we have the Swedish Companies Registration Office and Stockholm University as testbed and beneficiary of the Swedish consortia. Also, of course, the Swedish tax agency. On a national level, the picture beside the text shows that we have implemented the TOOP connector inside our Swedish national one's only layer. So a Swedish authority wanted to have information from another country, just have to use the Swedish base service as they use it for national information. So next slide. The result, which we reach quite soon, was a combined prototype between the business registration and the tax application. There is a recording of the prototype in the end of this presentation, but this is the Swedish point of single contact, and the aim is that as foreign users just go into that and use the EIDAS, your EIDAS EID and start the registration, and the e-service will be pre-filled from the source. That's one sort of principle also. Next slide. I think Robert was into some of this, but we have a motivation to go into that. Not just only that it was about business registration, but we also want to fulfill the user needs, and yes, that's one of the big parts, and also the quality of the data was really important for us. Then the last bullet, I think it's really important. Through TOOP, we as a Swedish authority and other Swedish authorities have gained a lot of knowledge that have led us to early activities to fulfill, among others, the single digital gateway. So I think the TOOP has served two goals. One is to establish a real e-service and fulfill the user needs, and the other is to gain us knowledge and information about upcoming regulations. Next slide. Lessons learned. Then there's 7 bullets here. I can shortly explain them. I think that we need to understand that if we are going to participate, we are doing that to supporting the vision of the digital single market. Otherwise, it will slow down the whole project, and we will not achieving our common goals. The transparency is a tough one because there are time limits, but if everyone has full insight in every activity, we will be more effective, of course. If the responsible authorities like the Swedish Companies Registration Office have leading roles, the implementation will be much more easy, of course. And since in TOOP we were 20 in the beginning, 21 in the end, 23 member states, so we don't keep the same pace. And I think in TOOP in the beginning we try to keep the same pace, but that's not possible. That's a lesson learned for all of us. And of course, TOOP was a real front-running project. So as a front runner in a front running project, you need to help the project with taking more initiatives because they are needed to get the project forward. And as a piloting partner to have the business case in place, also you try to aim at the real live e-services. Otherwise, it's just experimentations. Last bullet is just that the communication thing of the project, a large scale pilot cannot have the same methods for communicate with Germany and Sweden. It looks different. In some country, you need to communicate with the government. In other countries like Sweden, we have to search for special or organization or people. I think that next slide is the demo. So, and I think that or recording of the demo. Am I right? Or yes. Thank you. Then be back if you have some questions.
Okay, we're just waiting for this video to play so that it comes down the line.
Yeah. Otherwise, I think there are some slides that we can. I can even try to do it live.
Sure, we'll just
a
give
little
it a
bit
second.
unsure. A little bit unsure.
Okay, we're just working it out from this side here technically. Just a minute. Okay. Dun, dun, dun.
That's the law of everything.
Absolutely. We know we tested this before. I know I was in these sessions. We watched the video.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, this is a great little thing. But however, Hans, we did have a question here in the chat. So maybe we can do that one as we're waiting. How do you measure or get a sense of the demand side of OOP for your customers? And what do they expect that OOP will bring them? I'm going straight from the chat.
Very good question, this, because we don't really know, because we have measured the traffic from our neighbors, from Norway and Finland and so on, and they are really poor, because there are no possibility to do it on distance right now. TOOP will give us the possibility to do it on remote, and so we don't know the real needs. Because there are barriers right now to start a business in another company, because you have to travel to the company, you have to use the paper documents and so on. But the politics from the Commission is quite clear. We need a digital single market besides the single market.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now, let's just go back to our tech team here. Simon, did you get the video working? We see questions, Simon.
Unfortunately, there is a technical issue. So I think we can go move to the next presentation.
Yeah, I can do my presentation later, or if you, Simon, try to find my slides, I can do it later.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And let's just quickly, since we have the time, Hans, are you still there, sir?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we have one more question there before we move on to Ansgar. The question was, you mentioned that one benefit of TOOP is related to future legislation. Can you explain a little bit more about what you meant about that?
Yeah, in two parts. When we started the TOOP, we didn't know about the single digital gateway, but we can see the pattern. If you look at if you know about the Stork pilot, you know about the Peppel pilot, It's just a pattern that you first have the large scale pilot, then you have maybe Stork 2 was the second large scale pilot, and then you have the regulation. So it's quite easy it's not easy. You can see the pattern, and we saw the pattern here that it's probably would be legislation, because otherwise it don't work. So
Okay, sure. Very good. Thank you, sir. Okay, now let's, Shimon, let's go. I think we'll move on with our next speaker. We've gone back to Gray, Shimon. We had the slides there for a moment. So if we can flick back to Ansgar's slides. There we go. Beautiful. Now, Ansgar, are you there? Are you on the line?
Yeah, hello. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can. Thank you very much. Okay, please take it away.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Ansgar Monov. I'm working for the University of Koblenz here in Germany. And I was strongly involved in TOOP in the architecture team, but I'm also responsible for the German pilot implementation, and in particular also for the design of the e-procurement pilot. And yeah, I want to demonstrate to you a little bit something about the e-procurement pilot. Next slide, please. The e-procurement pilot is based on a couple of elements, and the major goal is here to demonstrate how evidences can be used in the e-tendering procedure and how TOOP can be used to simplify this. The e-procurement pilot is very closely connected to the SDG regulation, since the SDG regulation mentions explicitly the two e-procurement directives next to the procedures mentioned in Annex 2. So this is a relevant background of the SDG, and the SDG also mentioned the European Single Procurement Document, which is a key document in e-procurement for self-declarations, and the design of the SDG should not affect this European Single Procurement Document. So next slide, please. So here we have then a couple of components which we need to consider, or which we had to consider during the design of the e-procurement pilot. So the ESPD, the European Single Procurement Document, self-declaration used in procurement procedures to qualify economic operators and to describe the evidences behind that. Then we have, of course, the two actors, economic operators and contracting authorities. The economic operators that want to participate in a tendering procedure and that must prove certain criteria, and the contracting authorities that use the ESPD to validate whether economic operators fulfill these criteria. And then there's a particular thing in the procurement, the eCertis database. That's an information system which is used by economic operators and contracting authorities to identify the relevant evidences for certain qualification criteria. So it's something like the SERP, which has been provided, which has been illustrated by Jerry before. And many ESPD systems today are connected to eCertis. Next slide, please. So if we are looking to the current baseline process, we see here that economic operators usually use service providers to create the ESPD. The ESPD is then sent to the contracting authority, and the contracting authority can process the ESPD. The ESPD also already contains some method to reference evidences, but this method is not really very well defined and not really widely used. So the contracting authorities, in fact, always have problems to get these evidences from evidence providers or data providers. Next slide, please. So if we are looking to the roles also already introduced before, we have the data subject, which is always the economic operator, but we have two types of data consumers in the procurement pilot. So at first, it's the economic operator system itself, or the economic operator that wants to demonstrate or prove its eligibility through evidences or evidence metadata. And then we have the contracting authority, who also consumes evidences to prove the eligibility of economic operator. And then, of course, we have the data providers, which could be in e-procurement-based registries, but we have also a set of aggregators like pre-qualification bodies or agencies, or we have even competent authorities such as insurance companies, etc., that provide certain evidences. Next slide, please. So the pilot goal, the overall goal is to prove the eligibility of economic operators through evidences which are referenced in the ESPD. And ESPD service, therefore, firstly must be connected to ESertis in order to identify appropriate evidence types. And then ESPD service must be able to create and send TOOP requests for these evidence types to appropriate data providers. And then finally, the ESPD applications need to process evidences and evidence metadata received by TOOP responses. And also the data providers, of course, need to be able to answer TOOP requests and providing evidence and or evidence metadata through TOOP responses. Next slide, please. So overall, this is the let's say the design of the e-procurement pilot. We have basically two main type of transactions. So we have the first TOOP request response scenario, which is executed between economic operators and the data providers or evidence providers for setting evidence metadata into the ESPD. And then we have the second TOOP request response, which is then executed by the contracting authority. Based on the metadata established in the ESPD, contracting authorities then can retrieve the actual evidence from the data providers. Next slide, please. So yeah, the main drivers for this, as I have illustrated before, of course, are for the procurement pilot, the ESPD and the ESertis. And now in the next slide, I want to show you, illustrate you a little bit how this looks in reality. Next slide, please. So here you see a typical ESPD application, which is already currently used in the procurement procedures. So the economic operator here, for example, sees certain criteria on the left-hand side, and it can answer this criteria. Next slide, please. And now we are zooming a little bit in. And here you see on the left-hand side, for example, a criteria which is participation in a criminal organization. That's the criteria defined in the ESPD application, but it has also an interface to ESertis. So the blue spotted part, that is information retrieved through the ESertis interface. And then on the right-hand side, there's a possibility to describe the evidence metadata. And this is how it's currently designed. It's, in our opinion, a little bit weak, and we want to streamline this through the TOOP architecture. Next slide, please. So basically, by using TOOP, by integrating ESertis, we can help the economic operator to create an ESPD. So after the authentication, the economic operator identifies appropriate evidences in ESertis and then retrieves the evidences and can link the evidences in the ESPD. Next slide, please. So now we need to make a little bit karaoke because it's a animation. So could you make the first click, please? So at first, the economic operator who uses an ESPD service asks ESertis, which is a legal kind of information base for certain criteria in the country, and it retrieves back from ESertis the appropriate evidence type. Then it selects the evidence type which he wants to use for proving a certain criteria and requests from the DSD the more information about the evidence type and also includes the country into this request. The DSD then returns back appropriate data providers to the economic operator. Then again, the economic operator selects the most appropriate, the best data provider for him and asks the SMP service for routing metadata. The SMB then returns the routing metadata And in the next step, the economic operator then can create a TOOP request to the data provider in order to retrieve the evidence and evidence metadata. Yeah, next, please. Exactly. Then having this, the economic operator can preview the evidence, can maybe compare it with the answers given in the ESPD, and can then send the ESPD together with the evidence metadata to the tendering system. That is the process not relevant or not really piloted in TOOP. That is a typically procurement process then. But when the contracting authority then wants to evaluate the ESPD, then it can use the evidence metadata to again request from the SMP the routing metadata. So next, please. Yeah, one more, exactly. It then requests the routing gets the routing metadata from the SMP and can make then the second request to the data provider so that the contracting authority also is able to see the evidence. The background for this is really that the ESPD is by definition a self-declaration, so there are no documents contained therein, but we are providing evidences or evidence metadata to it so that the contracting authority can validate this at any time. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's just an overview about how the TOOP domain is interlinking with the procurement domain here. So the DSD and the eCertis, the yellow parts, are very closely interconnected, and we have currently very close discussions with DG Grow how this could be done. eCertis initially was made as an e-procurement service. Now it is designed more as a redesign focus on making it a multi-domain service. And usually eCertis is maintained by a couple of national eCertis authorities who are e-procurement experts and who can provide legal information to that. And then in TOOP, we use this information, or data providers can use this information to register appropriate evidence types that they are able to provide in the DSD, and also providing the routing metadata for that. And what we are currently still are under discussion is how eCertis and the DSD will function together. So the DSD has certain information, for example, about data providers which are not yet in eCertis, and eCertis, of course, has the evidence type. So there's, of course, a close interlink, and that are ongoing discussions. Next slide, please. Then finally, I want to have a very quick look to the overall business process, highlighting certain parts of the business process. So as mentioned before, we have 5 basic transactions. Next slide, please. The first transaction is between the economic operator and the data provider to request the evidence. Then the second transaction is that I'm getting back a response from the data provider with the evidence and evidence metadata. Then I send, as an economic operator, the ESPD and evidence metadata to the contracting authority. And then the fourth step is that the contracting authority requests from the DP the evidence and retrieves it back. Next slide, please. So in the first slide, the first precondition, of course, when doing such a request is I need to have an ESPD system. This needs to be connected to eCertis, and I need to identify an appropriate evidence type in eCertis. Then the economic operator connects to the data services directory to select an appropriate data provider. And for this, in order to align this, we have codified evidence types into data sets that are reused in the DSD. And of course, the data providers for these data sets are governed in the DSD for each evidence type. So yeah, finally, the economic operator creates a TOOP request out of the data which is contained in the ESPD, because the ESPD contains already a lot of information about the economic operator and other things. Next slide, please. for the second step then, so we are retrieving a response from the data provider. We found that the current design of the ESPD is not really well for how to reference evidences. So we built what we called ESPD TOOP extension, which is based on DCAT AP and also on the TOOP data model, which is based on DCAT AP to better describe data sets in the ESPD. That will be also input to the ESPD version 3. The ESPD system then should allow to preview these evidence metadata, and the economic operator can decide to adopt evidence metadata into the form. Next slide, please. Then the economic operator has to send the contracting authority, send the ESPD to the contracting authority. This is nothing what we are specifically piloting. This is usually done through e-tendering systems because the ESPD is just one element of a tender. Next slide, please. So then the contracting authority can open the ESPD, and once there's metadata established, it can easily create another TOOP request to the DP, which is referenced therein. All the information again from the ESPD is transformed into a TOOP request, and actually that's the same method as used for step 1 and 2, but we do not need to look up and select the DP anymore. This is already known, so the request is more or less defined in the ESPD. Next slide, please. Then the contracting authority receives the response, and it can view the evidence, it can validate the given answers by the economic operator and qualify the economic operator for procurement procedure. So last slide, please. So where we are now in TOOP. So we have in the TOOP architecture version 1, we have piloted this e-procurement pilot in a more narrow sense. Narrow by the meaning of we wanted to prove that with pre-qualification agencies. Our major goal was describing evidence metadata in the ESPD and then retrieved evidences through TOOP. But there were some limitations, so the ESPD could only be created by pre-qualification agencies that were settling these evidence metadata on their own. And the ESPD was not fully integrated with eCertis. Now, in the second version of the pilot, we are revising certain parts so that any data provider can be integrated into the process. So I can use any ESPD service and I can interlink any data provider or provide metadata or evidence metadata from any data provider into the ESPD. The pilot then fully integrates with ESPD, eCertis, and the TOOP DSD. We want also to pilot not only the documents itself, so that was the main focus for the moment, so to have real documents, physical documents, but we also want to retrieve structured information from the data providers, which can be placed into the ESPD form itself. So yeah, so that was my presentation for today. I think that e-procurement is a very good case also for the SDG because there are certain things established like the ESPD and eCertis, which could be very helpful for implementing the single digital gateway regulation. And for this, I think it's a quite important use case also for TOOP. Yeah, thank you very much. I hope I'm in time.
Yes, thank you, Angza. Thank you. Sir, good. Okay, we'll carry on with our next speaker before we have a small break from the Norwegian Maritime Authority. We have Walter, and he's working as a project manager with Norwegian Maritime Authority, working on projects that focus on digitizing the case handling systems. Walter Kongshaven. Walter, are you there, sir?
I am. Can you hear me?
Please take it away.
Yes, good morning. At least over here it's still morning. I understand that some of the participants might roll over into the afternoon around lunch. Sorry. As mentioned, I work as a project manager, and I represent the Norwegian Maritime Authority. So we heard the previous speakers heard that the TOOP principle is working very well for both business registration and the e-procurement side and domains. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to show that it also can be utilized in a completely other domain as well. Next slide, please. So we therefore looked at the possible uses in the maritime domain. It's kind of a giveaway since I work at the Maritime Authority. But this domain is heavily reliant on both international cooperation and trade, and certificates are issued here, maintained on paper by a relatively small number of organizations, which leads to a few challenges. Because when you have a paper version and the person that needs to check it has no direct access to the issuer, you need to show your certificates every single time you get inspected. So a lot of time is used on checking these certificates at the expense of other tasks. Also, in a worst case scenario, when a certificate is revoked, the paper version won't reflect that at all. It will still look exactly the same as when issued, and without a check with the issuer, it will be impossible to catch this upon inspection, possibly leading to unsafe situations. And then we also have the financial side of it, where there are cases where documents need to be flown into the vessel, resulting in wait times. And wait times reduce efficiency and thus increase costs for the customers. Next slide. So in the maritime domain, there's a lot of different processes. As I already mentioned, we focused on certificates and distribution and control of those. So this task is assigned to a port state control officer during both routine and unannounced vessel inspections. And left here is Dimitri and Ansgar mentioned earlier the different roles that the TOOP technology has. And in our environment, these are as shown here on the slide. We have a data consumer and data provider role, where the end users are port authorities, police, and border guard. And for data provider wise, it's the maritime organizations or recognized organizations that hold a database on behalf of nations. For Norway, it means we have 17 regional offices where we have PSCO roles with several persons per office. So it actually, there's quite a lot of people using the system on a daily basis. Next slide. If I'm going too fast, please someone let me know. I'm trying to stick within my time frame, but I didn't. I had to check this, so I have no clue whether I'm going to use 15 minutes or 10 minutes. So the objectives that we had. So what we want to do is, as shown here, we want to connect the databases and other registries that national maritime authorities or other parties have, enabling certificates to be provided to the end user. This would eventually substitute paper-based or electronically signed certificates. However, I'm quite sure that in a transition period, we need to have both at the same time. And not only would we connect those databases together, we would also make it available, of course, then for the data consumers, so they can actually check the certificates when needed. Next click, please. It won't be the next slide. So all this, no, just go one back. So it's just what we did. The objectives were just to show that the TOOP principle can work. It wasn't necessarily a goal to actually have it implemented as well. Next slide. Thank you. So how do we start? We wanted to make sure that the work we did would reflect the user's needs, and we therefore went to the actual inspectors and met the process of a ship inspection. So I won't go through all the details here, but the results show clearly that we can save a significant amount of time per vessel inspection on certificate control, as well as we're making life easier for the port state control officer. He can show up a lot more prepared during the inspection instead of having to do everything when he actually gets onto the vessel. Next slide. So the technical solution initially was based on the business registry and e-procurement needs, and we needed to make sure that it could also handle the data we needed to get from the Maritime Authority to the Port State Control Officer. We had a very good dialogue with the CCTF, and through a proactive and transparent approach, they actually managed to modify the TOOP architecture, even though it was not as easy as I make it sound here now, to incorporate those needs that we had. After that was completed, the individual nations then started implementing the technical solution nationally in a test environment. And as a group, we started to look at how we could use this in a longer term. Next slide. So as the maritime domain literally encompasses the entire world, and a lot of transport is going to and from the EU to other parts of the world, we realized that for maximum effect, it wouldn't be achieved unless the solution is implemented worldwide. Because it then has the potential to make a difference, seeing as maritime traffic to and from the EU only stands, maritime traffic from the EU only stands for only 10% of global maritime traffic. Relevant stakeholders in this process would be the ones mentioned earlier: maritime administrations, recognized organizations, the port state control authorities, border guard, police, but also digital health information systems, seeing as how the personnel certificates have a requirement there to incorporate that kind of information. So what values do we think we would be able to achieve? So from a safety and security perspective, we would always be able to deliver authentic certificate data. We would be able to reduce the workload of a crew or a ship's captain, because they don't need to use time to prepare for the actual inspection. And we would reduce the port state control inspection time, because the actual officer can prepare ahead of time before the vessel actually gets into port. Falsification is no longer, I wouldn't say impossible, but it's going to get improbable, because there's no physical certificate to modify. The information comes directly via secure means from the actual issuer. It can be instantly revoked, and it's also instantly available. The TOOP architecture doesn't have a centralized database. You go directly to the issuer and ask for a specific certificate for a specific vessel. And the transparency of the TOOP principle would also allow, would also be beneficial when creating automatic rules, when transitioning to autonomous vessels, as well as making it more accessible for everyone. For example, allowing apps to be created. Next slide. So earlier we saw a little picture of all the participating nations. We had these nations participate in work package 3.3, which is Greece, Bulgaria, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, Denmark, and Norway. Next slide. And so what did we actually achieve? So we got the relevant information requirement added to the TOOP architecture. Unfortunately, not as fast as we planned, but when it did get there, we got it right, and it worked. So we got that actually in place by close cooperation of the technical support elements, and they managed to create a very tight international group where focus was on delivery of the end result. I'm impressed with how they actually managed to share knowledge to not only their own nations, but also to the other participating nations. They were very incorporating in new members, helping out, and well, the results actually show that. So all that actually led to our first successful test in the summer of 2019, where we managed to send certificate data back and forth between the two nations. And that was achieved using the first version of the TOOP technical components. During the months after that, we managed to get successful data exchange between 5 of the participating nations. And simultaneously, while that went on, we had a look at possibilities for governance and sustainability in the maritime domain. Next slide, please. So what did we learn? Sorry, I'm not showing the next slide. I don't know if mine's, there we go. So, yep, just keep clicking, please, so we can get the entire slide. This is, I forgot to, yep, one back. There we go. So what did we learn from the testing that was done and the work around it? Well, first and foremost is that the once only principle works in the maritime domain, or it can work. It works in the test environment that we created. And that the problem that we want to reduce actually exists, and that it's also desired by the end user. Unfortunately, we also found that it's not so easy to have a centrally driven system to accept a decentralized solution. Also, if we want this to be an effective tool, we need to have a significant amount of data providers, in other words, maritime authorities or recognized organizations, so that the pool of databases that have certificates are large enough that it wouldn't be a burden for the port state control officer to have to switch to a different system based on a nationality of a vessel, because that would only lead to an additional system, not very effective. So what we found then when taking the results to our domain, that while we worked on showing that the solution works, others also recognized that there's a need here, and they defined the same issues we found and started their own initiatives. So we had several meetings with different responsible EU parties where we presented the results and the possibilities that the TOOP principle gives. We were met with a lot of interest, but it became quickly clear though that for us, for the vessel certificate, there is no market for the TOOP functionality, and not when related to ship certificates. We found out here that a similar solution is being developed, but with a centralized database, so not according to the principles we work with. The good news here, however, is that even though we're not using TOOP technology to achieve the goal, the quality goal will actually be achieved. Because even though it's a centralized solution, it will still have all the same benefits that we try to achieve. When it comes to exchanging personal certificates, there is an interest though, and we encourage the interested parties to reuse the experience and technology that we got through this project. So before I show you guys, I have a small video as well, so I hope that will work. If we go to the next slide. But before we go there, another clip, please. So we had a few things that were not addressed in the project. So one more. So we did not look or work with, we discussed it, we had a few workshops on how we could possibly implement this in the future, but we had no way of knowing which nations would commit to operating this way, and we had no active work trying to get as many to join as possible. We haven't looked at who would be responsible for maintaining the network infrastructure or how getting access to it would work. It's a European project, but as mentioned, the maritime domain is a worldwide domain, and it would be most beneficial if then also worldwide actors would get access. When it comes to personal certificates, we have not looked at any GDPR consequences, if any, and we haven't looked at how future changes or development of the solution would be handled in a decentralized environment. Next slide. So let's see if this one works. It actually works. So what you see here is we used a existing web page and remodified it for our needs, and we are now trying to access the Norwegian test database, looking at ship vessels. So I'm actually in Tallinn while doing this, and as you can see here, this specific vessel, based on an IMO identifier number, has 5 different certificates available. And I'm now downloading one certificate, the tonnage certificate, which I then, as a port state control officer, can look at when I need to prepare for a vessel inspection. And the same principle would also apply for personal certificates. So that was my presentation.
Lovely, thank you, Walter. Walter, we'll have a few questions. We'll just keep you on speaker for a moment there. The first one is that you were mentioning that, is it correct that this is still just test connections and test data? Was there any sort of real world stuff happening with this pilot?
No, it was just for test environments. From a Norwegian perspective, we had everything ready, but we needed to make quite a few changes to our national system in order to be able to incorporate this. And before we wanted to use the time and resources on getting those two connected, we would like to see a more probable benefit in the future, because if only the 7 nations that were in our work group would implement this, the benefits would be not enough to justify the amount of resources we would need to incorporate it. It's not a large amount to get it to work, but without the large maritime nations actually participating and sharing their data, there wouldn't be much of a benefit. It would just be a system that, of course, a control officer can use. But if you have a lot of different systems, we found out that they would be most likely just be shelved somewhere, because they would still use the existing procedures.
Mm-hmm. Is there any, I mean, we're looking across the EU and then even further, as you say, this is a worldwide thing. Is there any one system that is already in place, or is it this mismatch of paper and individual systems? What is it replacing some central system already?
There is a worldwide cooperation where people share information, but it is nothing similar to what we are trying to achieve here. And I'm sorry, I'm a bit vague here, because this is not my field of expertise. So I know there is systems that are being used to share information about vessels. There's ship trackers. There's a lot of information that are shared. The EU has some initiatives where also information about specific port visit, they're being registered. So there is a lot of information, but we looked at the possibility to take away some of the analog paper burden from the users and the port state control officers, and that doesn't exist as per today.
Okay, interesting. Very good. Thank you, sir. I was going to go back to, just before we take over to Ansgar. Ansgar, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, I want to pose the same one to you, sir, about your work and the project that you did. It was pilot information. Was there some sort of level of real world component, or can you tell us about that? Or was it just sort of test data?
The data was used, so test data was used for that. No really actual processes, but the components were mostly real life components. So what we are using, for example, in the procurement pilot is real data from or test data from pre-qualification services, but these pre-qualification services are really existing. So that is, I think, a principal approach. I don't know, probably also for the general business mobility that we are working with real systems, but with test data.
Okay, sure. That makes sense. And we have one more question. Look, I'm going to, it was in the chat, and I'm going to admit that I don't understand every acronym in here, but I will read it out to you and you can tell me. So regarding the ongoing efforts to make DSD and eCertis interact, is there more information available, and do you have some sort of timeline for achieving this?
No, no. I cannot really give an information on how that is going on. That is also not so much in the focus of TOOP at the moment. We are in connection with DG Grow. I think a good contact point for more information on that is also Mark Christopher Schmidt, who coordinates the multi-domain eCertis. But yeah, I mean, we now established a basic connection between the DSD and eCertis, but how that will evolve in the future, probably is a matter of the next months. Yeah.
All right, very good. Thank you both. Thank you to Hans, thank you to Ansgar, and thank you to Walter for your contributions this morning. Thank you everyone for listening. We're going to have a 10-minute break right now. We're going to have a 10-minute break, and then we're going to be back talking about TOOP governance and sustainability. So we will see you in 10 minutes time. Thank you. Okay. We are going to begin our next session here in the TOOP web conference. So our next session, we're going to have a short talk right now about TOOP governance and sustainability. And then after that, we're going to be having a longer panel discussion about the implementation in Europe. So that's going to be the panel discussion afterwards. So we're going to have a short talk right now. Wait, sorry. Just moving on with some technical things. Don't forget the video. Yes, the video. Okay, we're going to play the video that we missed from before. So Shimon. So this is the one from Hans Ekstol in Sweden.
Yes, it is, but it seems not to be any sound. Maybe I can comment it. Yeah, I think it's okay. This is the demonstration because there is no sound. I can comment it. This is the Swedish point of single contact. If you are you are coming here through the Europe, the single digital gateway portal, and you can choose to either do the both steps to the tax application and the business registration. But in this demo, you are just using the business registration. I think I'm going to click soon in the demo. I don't remember why does it. Okay, now I'm clicking. And this is the Swedish EIDAS node. So no, this is like some and you are choosing to the login options and you are choosing the foreign EID to go to the Swedish EIDAS node. That I've done this many times, so I think it's and there I'm a Slovenian citizen now. I'm trying to establish a business in Sweden to sell skis to Swedish skiers. But since I don't have the test data for the Slovenia, I'm using the Swedish EIDAS scheme. I'm still at the Swedish EIDAS node, clicking the Swedish or you must imagine the Slovenian EID. Okay, my name is Nina Greger. I need to approve that. That is my. This is from my EIDAS EID. I will approve that the Swedish point of single contact, the business portal, are using my EIDAS EID. I'm now at a simulation of the e-service that going to help me to start a branch, and there are like 5 steps in this. In the real world, it would be like 8, 9, 10. So and I will proceed by contacting the Slovenian business register to pre-fill my application. So click is done, and now this is the e-services. Now think about what Jerry showed you earlier on. I will give the system my registration number and maybe some other attributes, and the system will now. I'm choosing the Slovenia. This is just in test, and the TOOP connector will now work. It will contact the central TOOP mechanism and then the Slovenian business register. And as you can see, the data is there now. I think in the end we have to add some data, some contact things, some contact data or so, and then you have to click the button to register. And if everything goes well, you have a branch in 3 minutes. So that's all. And to just ask a question before it's spoked. This is in a test environment, but it is real connection and it's technical readiness, and we could put it in place, but we don't have any legislation to do it yet. It will come with a single digital gateway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hans. Thank you for commentating over the audio that we didn't have on your video. Thank you for picking that one up very quickly. Okay, our next discussion is TOOP governance and sustainability. We've got Professor Dr. Andriana Prenza from, she's a professor at the Department of Digital Systems at the University of Piraeus in Greece. And we've got Carsten Schmidt, who's a project manager at Taltech in Tallinn. Please, are you there? Carsten, are you there, sir?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, and Andriana? We have some buzz in the background. Dr. Andriana, are you there?
Okay, at least I think I can start until Andriana probably will join. And then, yes, hello, first of all, from my side.
Just a moment, Carsten. Could you move your headset a little closer to your mouth? You're quite low volume.
Yes, I can try. Is it better so?
That's a bit better. Thank you.
Okay, and then I switch off my camera because I'm in Germany, and you know that in Germany we always have issues with the bandwidth. We are one of these digital banana republics. And yes, thank you very much. And yeah, with the next slides, we want to give you a brief overview of that, what we have done in the area of TOOP related to governance and sustainability. And as you have heard at the beginning already in the opening speeches by Anders and by Robert, we are not starting from scratch. We are surrounded by former large-scale pilot projects like eSense, like PEPPOL, and like Spox and Stork. And so we had to take into account and also the opportunity to pick up several things and to reuse them for that what we are doing here in TOOP, from technical wise, organizational wise, and also sustainability wise. And this is, I think, something that we had investigated first. And then on the other side, the area of sustainability itself and governance related to large-scale pilot projects is still evolving area. In general, the whole area of sustainability, as you know, more or less started as per definition in 2005, and so it's a quite young area. And we are still evolving and working on this, especially if it comes to the transition from a large-scale pilot project into reality, and to come up with a proper governance that ensures the long-term sustainability, the handover to organizations, to administrations, to member states, and also to the European level. And therefore, we started to prepare the ground. Next slide, please. With several preparatory activities. So the activities that we have focused on was, first of all, the identification of drivers and barriers for the cross-border implementation of a once-only principle. And we looked to the quite diverse landscape in Europe, because we had already, at this time when the project started in 2017, some member states and associated countries that had some ideas or also implemented laws and principles for the once-only principle in place, and other member states that had just an idea about the once-only principle. And so we looked to this quite diverse area and tried to identify drivers and barriers for the cross-border implementation. And we did this at the beginning, and we're still continuing these activities until the end of the project to see the evolution of these drivers and barriers across the time. At the same time, we started with a first impact assessment around the implementation of the once-only principle, and we are still in this working phase, and we try to compare the expected impacts by our stakeholders, by our partners in the project, and then we have to see and we want to see how these evolution impacted that what was happening during these years, and see what are the differences between the first expected impacts and that what are the real impacts on the implementation, especially after now these, as you have heard, the SDGR, the Single Digital Gateway Regulation, is in place and is framing the whole area of the once only principle from a European level down to the local level in all member states and the EEA area. Next slide, please. So this, what we did, I think, went hand in hand with the analysis and the definition of the project artifacts that we have developed during the lifetime of the project. And so we had to decide what are the outcomes of the projects that have to be maintained and have to be sustained. And for that, we had to develop, based on that, what was already developed by a former large-scale pilot project, by other areas related to that, what we are doing. So we had to look into the methodologies, had to amend them and to customize them for that, what we are doing, but on the other way, to make them as generic as possible so that they are reusable. Then we had to identify the data models and the specifications of our project that are worthwhile to be sustained and to be maintained after the end of the project. And last but not least, as we are a pilot project that are piloting as close to reality as possible, as you have heard, we have to identify the important software components and the sustainability strategy for that. So we decided to come up with the different sustainability plans and with separate sustainability plans for all project outcomes that are worthwhile to be sustained, and we defined these sustainability plans. We are still working on this. Some of them are already ready because these outcomes of the project's results are already ready. They are finalized more or less. For some of them, as you have heard, we are in the still in the piloting phase. We are working, but we are very sure that we are be able to finish all these things in time. And last but not least, as we have to ensure the proper handover and sustainability, we have to come up with policy recommendations to the European level, to the member states, for long-term governance and sustainability of all these results and outcomes. Next slide, please. So what are the methodology that we have developed? And I think this, so we looked into that, what was done already in that area, what was used by other project, and what is well accepted by especially European Commission as one of our main stakeholders, but also member states and other partners. And so we decided together with our auditors and our partners in the project that we go for the so-called GOFA model, and that we focus on governance sustainability, on an organizational sustainability, financial sustainability, and architectural sustainability. So that means that we have to ensure that the community still exists and has a proper governance, that organizational wise we can ensure a daily the daily business on that, and that we have a proper financial background for all these activities, and that there is from a technical point of view really something that is so stable and robust that it can be sustained. And for that, we made a kind of assessment related to the maturity level of these different artifacts that were developed by the pilots and the technical parts of our project to be sustained, and that we have these things in place. So, and what are the parts that we have in our business cases and related to the artifacts and the pilots? What we are doing there is we come up with the recommendations for future owners, because, as I said, the project will end, you have heard it by Robert, that it is planned to end at the end of January next year. So we have to have an idea for handover and what have to be done by the future owners. Then we see the need for a development development plan. So what has to be done then in the future to have a even more robust solution in place as we are having it at the moment. Then there is also, I think, that not everything is self-sustainable here and self-financiable. So we have to see what are the business cases and the business that can be generated around these around the pilots. And last but not least, we see the need to also to make some recommendations and conclusions on that is what is already on the market on the European level with the SDGR, legally speaking, and from a legal area point of view, and also on the member states to give the member states and the European Commission some advice for the SDGR group to even fine-tune and that what they have already in place, and also to support them related to the so-called implementing acts, these secondary level law that is still under construction and that need to be in place before the transition phase is ending at the end of 2023. Next slide, please. And what we are doing is we are trying to do this based on sustainability plans that are specific for the different outcomes and results of our project. And these sustainability plans are made for the TOOP connector. That is one very important thing. It's a very nice thing that bundles several technical artifacts of our project and helps, it makes it very easy to implement and interconnect a national system with a European level. Then we have the so-called SDG pilots. These are the pilot areas that are covered by the Single Digital Gateway regulation. And then, as you have heard, we have e-procurement as an additional pilot and the maritime pilot as pilots aside of the SDGR pilots, so that we see if that what we are doing also fits not only with that what is already regulated, but also will be in the future regulated or could be regulated, also to have some proper recommendations there. And last but not least, as I already said, to focus also more on the technical outcomes and technical artifacts in the project. And what we, I think, on top have done, and I think this is a very important thing, as we are in the European Union and also in the EEA area, not living on an island, we are looking to that what we are doing from a non-member state perspective, and it's based on the specific view of Switzerland and Turkey, to see that what we are doing is as generic as possible, and that we can also hand it over and reuse it to other countries outside the European Union and probably also outside the Europe itself. That's the main goal also behind the sustainability plans. Next slide, please. Next, yes. And for that, we want to ensure, as I said, the governance, the long-term governance, and also the long-term maintenance for that. And we have several ideas, and we have the strong support, especially of the European Commission, but also the member states, and as I said, also the associated countries. And so we are doing here and coming up with some assurance of the organizational sustainability. So we are try to facilitate and promote the international cooperation of our stakeholders. Then we have the ideas and also the recommendations how the once only principle can even be advanced and enhanced in this area, and also how the underlying principles for e-government and the interoperability solutions can be extended and further supported. And what have we done already here? And you will hear it even more. We have heard all about it, and you will hear even more. We have started the licensing and handover of the first results. That was done by the 11th of September, and then the European Commission with the CEF colleagues are so kind to ensure the sustainability. But as we all know, not everything can be handed over to the European Commission or the member states. We also established a non-profit organization under Belgian law, the onesonly.org ASBL, and also to support the long-term sustainability of the outcomes of the project results. And that's, I think, is the thing that the combination of the support and involvement of European Commission, member states, and onesonly.org from our point of view at the end will ensure the long-term sustainability of all important outcomes of our project. Yeah, that's it, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Nice. Thank you very much, Carsten. Thank you for picking up that whole presentation. You did very well. We did have a question from a colleague in public administration in India, and so very far outside of the European Union. And they want to know, how can they continue to access progress of TORP beyond January 21?
Yeah, as I said, I think some of these things will be handed over to the European Commission. So then I think it would be worthwhile to get in contact with the colleagues from the European Commission. But on the other side, we are in this transition phase, and in cooperation with our beneficiaries, we are trying to do as much as possible to hand it over also to onesonly.org. And I think you can also be in contact with this organization, and then it will be ensured that you have proper access also after the end of the project to the project results, and can even be involved and probably also not only involved, you can also probably become a partner of that what we are doing there.
Okay, right. And so the onesonly.org would be the place
Yes.
for the updates and for everything there. Good. Okay, very nice. Any further questions for Carsten before we move on? But very informative talk, sir. Good. Okay, I think we will move on there. Thank you very much, Carsten. Thank you for your talk and picking it up today, sir.
Thank you.
All right. We're going to move on with our panel discussion now, and our panel discussion will go for 40 minutes. And on here, so we're talking about the implementation in Europe, the lessons that we have learned across different institutions. So we know that TORP was about connecting e-government systems in different countries and making those connections between data consuming applications and the providers of that data. So making sure that we can get access to things like business registries across Europe, but also while working within the national infrastructures and without interfering with them. So we're going to be looking now at the lessons that we have learned from the TORP project from various perspectives, looking from the coordinator perspective, from the project partner perspective, and also at the European Commission level. So welcoming into our panel discussion right now, we have three people. We have Robert Krimmer, who has already spoken today. He's the TORP coordinator. We have Kristina Redeker from DG CNECT, and we have Alenka Nemek from the Ministry of Public Administration in Slovenia, a lovely place. Are you all there? Welcome, everybody.
Yes, hello. Hello, Louis.
Nice to see you again, Robert. Very good. Kristina, are you there?
I'm there. I'll try even to connect with my video. I've changed from Germany to Luxembourg thinking that I'm leaving the Banana Republic, as was said before, but sometimes I do have problems with my internet.
Sure. And Alenka, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Everybody.
No problems. Good. Cool. So we're all here. So we'll have a bit of a discussion. I've got some thoughts. I've got a few questions for our three panelists. Feel free to jump in if you have some ongoing thoughts from something that somebody else has said. This is the point of the panel discussion. It's not meant to just be straight question and answer, that you can all contribute from your own unique perspectives. So I'll start off, Robert, with you there. So what do you think are from your perspective as the project coordinator, what do you feel are the main achievements of TORP?
Yeah, thank you, Louis. I mean, as you can already see from the large number of participants that we have here, on the one hand side, really those that are working inside the project, but also those that are closely following it, and also that will come after us from our successor project D4A, which also will present a bit about. I think the first and foremost important thing is to build a community of organizations, of people, of researchers, of public administrations that are actually looking at the further integration of Europe. I mean, if we look back at the beginning of electronic government at the late 90s and early 2000s, then ideas such as from the researchers Lane and Lee, that were talking about providing information, building transaction services, and then talking about vertical and then horizontal integration. That was all on a national level. And now, in the past 5 years, we have worked on building this cross-border perspective, that we're actually leaving this national context and coming together of something that's bigger than just working inside your own country silo, and breaking that up and actually integrating Europe also on the digital level. I think that's the core achievement that has been moved forward. Of course, it has been done beforehand in other large-scale pilots that have done it in different domains, but I would say this is the first time that we're actually working on building something which could be called a data exchange layer for Europe. What we've clearly seen in our project is that if a country already has this integration layer, this data technical system that allows connecting its various domains, various silos together to provide a digital approach to administering services in a country, then it's much easier to connect also cross-border. And that is the core experience that we had in the TOOP project, that if you are thinking along the lines of integrating service, integrating data for the citizens and businesses, then you can enable a much better way of transforming your public administration. And I think that having a community of individuals that are willing to work on this, on develop this is the core part. And then actually also having this proof of concept, this technical system for the first time that allows for having such a generic connection of different services across Europe, as well as data registries. I think that's
very interesting. Robert, has it been difficult that some countries are quite advanced in this area and some countries are already using their own solutions quite effectively, and other countries are very much not advanced in this area? How are you sort of bridging those gaps? Or what's the steps that a country would take first if they haven't got any of this infrastructure?
So I think the key part here is to first and foremost realize that building such a technical system for a public administration also means that you're aware about your own individual context, on the individual context that allows for identifying your citizens, for identifying your businesses, that you have your actual individual technical solutions, but somehow you need to find a way to bridge these solutions to be able to interoperate with the solutions from other countries. So to basically leave that horizon that everything has to work with your systems, but rather that you find a way of how you can work in a European way together, that you're actually defining the interfaces at your country's borders, and that there is a European definition of how these interfaces should look like, and then connect to each other. So it doesn't matter how a country organizes its own public administration digitally, and still you need to be able to connect, to discuss, to exchange data, and that I would say is a core element here. The second thing is, what should do a country think about when think about doing cross-border e-government? First and foremost, actually provide this vertical and horizontal integration of your services inside your country, and then define your interface, ideally taking over the interface that has been developed in the context of TOOP, respectively in the single digit gateway regulation, and actually enabling your systems to connect to that. And that should prepare you in the best way forward. And then, of course, there are a couple of more things to do around semantic interoperability, but that is more on a technical implementation level. I think on a policy level, it's really about getting this mindset right, that you need to connect rather than duplicating effort.
Okay, makes sense. Very good. We did have a question. Could you comment a little bit on, I mean, in this discussion, we're talking about connecting inside of Europe, but there has been quite a bit of extra thought about how are we connecting to third-party states, how are we connecting outside of the EU. It's good to keep that in mind when creating the architecture, even if those connections are not made straight away. But how does those thoughts about connecting to non-EU countries, how is that meshing with the recent policy directions towards digital sovereignty and inside of the European Union. Is there some thoughts that you have on that?
No, I mean, I think the one part that became really clear for the TOOP project is that while you think that the technical system can be easily matched and you can work on an interface, you need to have a certain legal basis in order to be able to exchange data, in particular when it comes to personal data. Here, the European realm, in particular the European Union's framework of the General Data Protection Regulation, is really a cornerstone development or legal development that enables but also makes it much harder to connect outside the European Union when those minimum standards, so to say, are not being met. I mean, we see that now with the whole problems about transferring data from Europe to the United States and the basis for that. Similarly, you need to have a legal act to be able to exchange that data, and that will be actually the task then for the countries from outside Europe to work on together with the European Union on how to connect. But on a technical level, I think that's relatively easy to prepare yourself for that. But getting the legal act right, that's going to be a core part there. When we're talking in particular about exchanging personal data, and that needs to be guaranteed and ensured that all of this is done properly.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, you from an architecture level and, as you say, from a technical level, you can set it up, you can create the interfaces, you can do everything. But really, to flick the switch, to turn it on, has to come from a political level, and that's really in the court. The domain of those. Pardon me, of the ball court. I was thinking, sorry, in that analogy of politicians. Okay, I want to move around a little bit. I will come back to you, Robert, just so we're including all of the speakers in our panel discussion here. Christina, I would like to go to you and pose a few questions. First of all, Christina, can you introduce yourself? Talk about where you're coming from, what your involvement has been in the project, and then we'll talk a little bit more.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. Hi, I'm Christine Redeker. I studied mathematics and philosophy, so I have a PhD in the philosophy of mathematics, which is a bit strange because after that, then I worked on digital education for quite some time at the JRC, another European Commission body, before joining DG Connect last year. So when I joined last year, I started working on the Single Digital Gateway Regulation system of Article 14, which is the OOP system, as you know. I have not been involved directly in the TOOP project, which has been my colleague's baby. You probably know Anders very well. Unfortunately, he had an important meeting, so he could not join the panel as originally planned. So I'm here to step in for him and to represent DG Connect H4 e-government. Any more questions, Luis?
Sorry, pardon me. Yes. Getting everything going here. Dear me. What do you think are the main barriers from the Commission's perspective in implementing the once only principle in Europe?
Well, I think that Professor Krummer has touched upon it already. Our strength as Europe is our diversity, but at the same time, it's sometimes an obstacle to agreeing on a joint infrastructure. So when we're now trying to come up with an implementing act for the Article 14 evidence exchange system, we do realize that we have to bring together these different legal systems, the different cultures of exchanging evidence, and also the different standards and different states of the art. So we are confronted with very, very different systems. Some countries have already moved away from evidence exchange and are thinking in the direction of exchanging data directly, whereas other countries have not really digitized most of the evidences properly. So this is the spectrum we are addressing and where we need to find a common denominator.
Okay, makes sense. How do you see this? I mean, if you could gaze into your crystal ball and see how this is going in 5 to 10 years, are you optimistic that we're going to be able to pull this together and some of the member states that are less digitized, get them on board? How do you sort of see that looking in 5 and maybe even if we can extend the crystal ball very far to 10 years? How do you see that?
No, I'm extremely optimistic. I think this project has done a great job in accelerating things, and we see we're a lot further than we were 3 years ago when we started with TOOP. Also, the digital gateway regulation accelerated things. So I think we're really making a step change now. Now, we all know that what we're working on is a very anachronistic paradigm of evidence exchange still. So it's really difficult to say when this will change. So we know that we're creating now a system that we will need to revise in 5, 10, maybe 15 years time, because by then we'll have completely different ways of exchanging knowledge, exchanging credentials, etc. But I see this system, the way we're creating it now, as flexible enough to assume these new challenges and take on board new developments. So I'm very optimistic that in 5 or 10 years time, we will have a system that will actually overcome the current barriers, and will create something that is harmonized, but at the same time gives freedom to all the member states and allows them within their sovereignty, within their legal requirements, to issue evidences properly and in an accepted way, but still allowing them to be exchanged. So I'm very optimistic. What I see as one of the main points which we will need to discuss in 5 or 10 years' time is to think about who is actually the owner of these evidences and this data. Is it the administrations who should share this data among themselves, or is it the person in the middle who should be able to decide which credentials to share in which way? So this is, to me, an open question, and I'm not sure that we can go both ways. So I'm looking forward to having that discussion in 10 years' time, if you allow, with a follow-up project, and we'll see where we stand and what we decide.
Robert, you look like you had some thoughts on that topic.
No, clearly, I mean, I would say who's the owner of your data? I mean, that's always a really crucial part, and in particular, how to provide the necessary transparency and accountability to the individual for how their data is being transported through the different various systems. And I think that's going to be a key challenge. I mean, I think we have two answers to that already as part of the architecture. On the one hand side, the actual consent of the individual to transferring that information, but on the other hand side, to provide this preview function. But I think on the longer run, we need to provide that, we need to go even further to give the individual really full control how their data is actually being handled, and to give that at any point in time, that overview. I don't think we're fully there yet. We have certain aspects of that already developed, and also as part of the TOOP project. But to provide that on a holistic level for all the different areas, I think we first need to tackle the one thing that also Ms. von der Leyen was mentioning, to have this European EID. I think that's going to be the core challenge to solve, that we are actually able, on the one hand side, to match the identities between countries, but also then to match the different data sets. I think that's going to be the records actually in the end. So that's going to be another challenge next to actually answering this question, who is the owner of the data?
Makes sense. Makes sense. And that, I mean, that's, and then identifying, then using identification technologies to work out that is the person, say who they are. If we've got one ID that's matched across many countries and we can work that out, that's fine. But then we've still got the personal identification level of so forth. And one solution might, for example, be ID cards with chips like we do in Estonia or something like that. Is that a good enough solution? How is that? And that could be a single point of failure as well across different countries, if different countries are not using similarly secure technologies for that final endpoint of verification of the individual as well.
We certainly need to find a European solution to that, right? That allows for a federated system, yes.
Yeah.
Christina,
I mean,
sorry, go ahead.
For the ELD part, we're very close to finding a European solution. We will come up with a proposal very soon, either at the end of this year or at the middle of next year, for European electronic identification means. And then we will take this first step now of ensuring that all individuals can authenticate themselves with a trusted identification and not using Google accounts, for example. So that's our first step, and I think we're very close to that. And then see how we move from there to getting this OOP system to the next level.
Krista, could you say any more about that? Is that some private information? Is that some secret information about how that process is going, or is there something more you can say?
Well, I don't think, if Ursula von der Leyen is talking about it, I wouldn't call it secret. So no, we've been working on this for this whole year. and we're planning to come forward with something very soon. But we cannot say a definite date because different dates have been also publicly announced by Ursula von der Leyen and other people. But definitely, we know that the whole Commission is eager to see this European digital identity come, and it will come. We are finalizing the impact assessment for the upcoming legislation, and let's see how long it takes to get it through the different bodies that need to agree. But it will come before June next year.
Okay, good. We might, as we, okay, so there were some questions in there. So how does that, Christina, then how does that relate to the EIDAS, EIDAS system? How does that, these new efforts relate to EIDAS system? Or would that be changed or revised, or how do they fit together?
That is exactly what we need to decide. It's part of the EIDAS review, and it will definitely lead to a revamped version of EIDAS, a new version of EIDAS. We don't know exactly how we will frame it, but it will definitely come up with a renewed proposal.
Okay. All right, so there are different options as people are talking about in the chat, but and as you said, there's still a lot of work and discussion to find a resolution there. I want to bring in now Alenka Nemec from Slovenia. Alenka, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Lovely, welcome today. So you are sort of like a you partner project, I guess, say, to TOOP. Can you tell us first of all a little bit about yourself, about your department, and how you fit into TOOP here?
Yes, of course, but allow me first a small detour because today Slovenia declared the national holiday, sports day, and I promised my colleagues to wear a yellow T-shirt, but I don't find anyone at home. So if I would have a presentation, I would add to logo on top on both O's bicycle with the Slovenian flag, you know, so because we want to Tour de France. Okay, but going back to the TOOP project, our Ministry of Public Administration is a coordinating body for e-government development at the national level, and we are providing different building blocks and common solutions, guidance for other institutions. And we are, of course, with providing those common solutions, we must be really up to date that those building blocks and solutions are responding to all this EU regulation, national regulation, these modern principles of development, and cross-border and OEP, once only principle, are in particular and most challengeable area that we need to tackle. And to go back to present myself, I'm working in this area already during the last 10 years, and I was responsible for coordination of TOOP project for Slovenian contribution, and we learned from the past that implementing those principles and legal regulation, it's simply they simply cannot be done only on paper in the provisions and in the strategic or action plans. So I think that it's very good that the Commission recognized this challenge and offered us the opportunity to work in these pilots of large scale, and where we can really have the playground and opportunity for the collaboration, to exchange experience, and to develop the solution, come up with the solution that are really taking into account also the specifics of each countries. And in TOOP, I think that TOOP offered us opportunity to test all these our national solutions from talking about eIDAS authentication and trust services to our actually national OEP platform, national platform that we use for once only principle. And for us, I must say that it was relatively easy to extend the functionality of our national solution to connect to TOOP core components. And I believe that we were quite successful with our pilots. We successfully implemented them. But I must say that you just talked about this eIDAS. It was our lessons learned from the TOOP project that eIDAS framework as it is in present doesn't respond to all these challenges of single digital market and especially not to OEP. So we are waiting with anticipation what will the Commission propose to improve these solutions.
Okay, sure. It's as many countries are, as you are as well. Have you found it hard? Was it difficult for Slovenia as a sovereign nation when you were coming up with your own internal systems? I mean, you've got your own internal systems and you've got an interface that is connecting at an EU level. Was it difficult? I wasn't quite sure from your talk. Was it difficult or relatively easy at times when the EU hasn't quite worked out what they need at a commission level? We're not quite working out what their goalposts are, and then you're trying to build your own internal system? Or were you just thinking, okay, this is going to change, we'll just build a very flexible interface? And you did mention that from your interface, it was easy to connect to the TOOP system, or connect to the TOOP pilot. Sorry. So how is it for you? I guess my question is, how is it for you to interface at a European level if sometimes the European Union hasn't worked out its own mind, or you just kept that in mind and just made really great interfaces?
Well, if you are asking me, as I said, for TOOP components, it was relatively easy. But now raising this solution to EU level and covering also different piloting or services areas, I think, as Professor Kremer already said, we are still need to work on the further on this development. Especially, we are facing now the challenge how to tackle this legislation from the legal level first, because I think that Slovenia is quite has quite personal data protection is very important. Everything that we do online, so this is something that I think that we are all need to tackle before coming to the final technical solutions.
Okay. That's very interesting. I realized as you were speaking, I don't have a lot of information about the particular situation in Slovenia. So do you have ID cards right now? Can I log in? Is there a Slovenian ID card that you can log into national services? How is it for a Slovenian citizen to interact with the government?
For the national level, we predominantly rely on digital certificates that are issued by the government or by the private companies, and they all can be used for e-government services. But Slovenia is one of the I don't know how many now, around 12 countries that hasn't yet notified according to eIDAS for the cross-border usage. So we are not allowing our citizen to actually do the services cross-border. So this is one of the definitely one of the problem. But we will introduce new eID in August the next year, according to the new EU regulation on this travel documents. So we are expecting to have our citizen ready to use cross-border services in other countries in 2022. So
Okay.
we are also from this perspective, we are really eager on this Commission proposal that Christine was mentioning. So we are, as I said, we are expecting this in more details with really great anticipation.
Okay. Good. Let's. I'm gonna loop back up there to Robert again. Let's go back to again looking at that European-wide level. What do you feel were the main challenges implementing? Do you think is it technical challenges, legal challenges, political challenges? What do you think are the main challenges we've learned from the TOOP pilots?
I mean, I think the first challenge is more a mindset one, right? So, I mean, getting your organization to understand what does it mean to exchange data rather than exchanging documents, right? I think that's on the long run going to be a key difference that we will see, that you're actually relying on the data in a register rather than a document which actually, as it says already in its name, documents the state at one particular point in time rather than the link to one entry in the database that might evolve. Think about your own personal address, right? When you move between countries or even within one country, one city, and right now you have to inform all the different entities about your new private address. And when you just link to your entry in the population register, all of those public entities will be informed or can access that new address without having to maintain that data over and over again. And that's the core, I would say, mental difference. And I think that's still the one that has to be made as part of this discussion around OOP, that really people start to understand we're not only talking about exchanging information from one place to the other, but eventually we're going to talk about linking data sets together and providing through that better quality and less redundant information collection. And once that mindset, organizational understanding has been achieved, it clearly also is a legal barrier, but also driver at the same time. We saw that very clearly in the project. Up until the time that the public entities had understood that the single digit gateway regulation will have a major impact on their data exchange, that was quite of an excuse almost. Legally we cannot do it, sorry, But once they understood that that will become a necessity, once they have the systems in their countries and providing their services in their countries to their citizens, that they will also need to provide those services cross-border, then we saw an immediate run and rush in the agenda also. I mean, basically the topic moved up in the agenda. We got full support from capitals, and our partners had a much easier time to get the support needed for working inside the project. So we clearly see legal measures as the core barrier that inhibits that exchange of data. But then again, once that is overcome, it becomes the major driver. And that's also what our system shows. And then, of course, you have the technical challenges. I mean, I already mentioned one that's about data identity and record matching. That's going to be a key one when we see and we gain more and more experience. Once we have that tackled, on the interoperational level, I think we have developed a system that allows us really to keep that federated approach and to allow and say, like, whatever you do in your country, do it and continue to do it, but provide us that interface and connect to that European interface, and you will be able to exchange the data. I think that's what we achieved in the project, and that's those three key areas or key learnings that we have from it.
Okay, so because you talked about changing the mindset, and that was the hardest part, and that was, I mean, and when you say mindset, I mean that's of individual data owners inside of countries or individual organizations inside of countries, or first of all, whose mindset were you sort of referring to there? And then secondly, is that really the point of TOOP, to get, this is more like a challenge, a pilot, and you go like, hey, this is what's really needed. And they go like, oh, right, we see. How do those fit together?
I mean, I would say it's a gradual process. I mean, eventually everyone has to change their approach towards data as such, right? So, I mean, even the individual that talks about like the birth certificate, that they don't consider this one document the key important one. I mean, I still have that folder here in my cupboard that really is, I mean, it's that thick for every kid. I have plenty of documents that I keep and I cherish, right? But eventually, at some point in time, it will become irrelevant because the data will be in a connected database over which you have full control. And this move has to happen first and foremost, or had to happen for the people in our project, but has to happen in the end for every individual citizen and business, but that will take time. TOOP obviously cannot achieve that, but it can show that this is a barrier, this is something that needs to be overcome, and digital mindsets need to be built. So you need different measures on the one side to show solutions, you need to educate people, they need to get a better technical understanding. So it's a long-term process, and it's different from context to context how you can achieve that. I mean, whether we think about the German Datenangst or about other, so in some countries it's harder than in others. You need to tackle it differently. So in Germany, you need to build it a lot around security, on how you can have the transparency and accountability. While in other countries like Estonia, that's already a given and it's easy. And yeah, let's move on. Yeah, let's forget the documents. Let's only talk about data. So there is certainly a different level of a different expectation in Europe, and that makes it sometimes harder and easier at the same time. But we need to get to this European understanding, and that's what this project helped with.
Sure. And and just, I know it sort of goes back a little bit, but you made such a good comment before that often you said, I'm paraphrasing, but the legal the sort of the political and the legal sort of lags behind sometimes, but then when it catches up, it really catches up and it becomes the main fire that pushes everything, because then all of a sudden the legal kicks in and then it's like, oh, now we've got to implement this.
I mean, it also has the other burden, right? I mean, the laws and the directives sometimes also have dates included in there by when you need to be ready. Yeah. And so the single digital gateway regulation has put very clear dates forward. In 2023, we need to be ready. Yeah. So we have some urgency. We have a lot of work to do. We did the first step, but let's follow with the others now.
All right, I want to wrap up. There was a question here. I've got to admit, again, a terminology that I wasn't quite sure of, talking about EU data spaces and that particular initiative. But is there something known about how TOOP will affect the EU data space initiative? Have I understood that correctly?
Not to my knowledge. Could be, but I'm not aware of any relationship there. But I would like to add something else, because we've talked about a lot about the power of legislation, and I would like to add to that the power of money. So we now have the new recovery and resilience facility, and it is really good to see that under this new facility there will be a lot of funds made available for public administrations for digitizing in general their assets and for moving to the next steps of digitalization. Of course, this is due to another factor that we haven't talked about really. We need to change the mindsets, yes, but the mindsets of many people have been changed during the Corona crisis, because all of a sudden what was considered an alternative channel to administrations was the main channel, the only channel for some people. So I think we are already there. We're seeing that these mindsets are being changed much more rapidly than we could have hoped for, and that we really have a chance here now with the new legislation through the single digital gateway, with the money being made available at European level for the recovery, and with the insights at all levels that we need to embrace digitalization to make this new era that we are all looking forward to, especially the TOOP project, to make that happen. So I'm very happy to see where we stand now, and it's an excellent point in time to finalize this project.
Very nice. We need to wrap it up there. I want to thank our panelists today, Robert, Christina, and Alenka. Thank you very much for your contributions.
Thank you.
Very nice. Okay, we are going to have, we're due for a break now. We're a few minutes behind the schedule, so we're going to have a 5-minute break. We'll have a 5-minute break, and then we're going to be back talking about the SDG roadmap and its impact on once only. So our next session, What Happens Next, will be beginning in 5 minutes' time. See you then. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's carry on with our final session of the TOOP webinar this afternoon, this morning and this afternoon. So our last session for this afternoon is about what's happening next. We have looked at what we achieved with the TOOP pilot projects. Now we're going to look a little further towards the future. So we're going to be having 4 different sessions now. So to start this off, we're going to be looking at the SDG, the Single Digital Gateway Roadmap, and its impact on once only. And talking to us about this is Fleur Brie-Lewin, and she's a team leader for the Single Digital Gateway at the European Commission. And previously, she worked with the European Commission on the digitization of transport processes. Certainly is an expert in the matter. Fleur, are you there?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Please take it away.
All right. So I think the single digital gateway was raised many times this morning, and that's for a very good reason, which is that as of 2023, it will be a legal requirement, thanks to this regulation, to use the once-only system in a number of areas. What I'm now going to do is to guide you through what is the single digital gateway as a whole, and then I focus more precisely on the once-only features of the gateway. So now if we move to my next slide, basically the gateway is an answer to a call from stakeholders who told us repeatedly that their number one issue to do business within the single market is, on the one hand, the difficulty to find information about the rules that apply to them, and on the other hand, the heaviness of administrative procedures. So the gateway aims at tackling this problem by relying on 3 main pillars. And the first pillar is about information. So here we want to address the difficulty to find information nowadays. And for that purpose, we want to ensure that by the end of this year, there will be a single access point online for citizens and for businesses who want to move abroad or to do business in another member state, to find easily all the information that they need about the rules that apply to them within the single market. So what that means is that right now we're busy together with member states in making sure that all information that is necessary about the rules that apply to our users are available online, either on European websites when it comes to EU legislation, or on national websites when it comes to national information. And all these websites are going to be part of the gateway. Now, from the user perspective, what that means is that we will make available on the existing Your Europe portal that you may know already, a search facility where the user will be able to type in the type of request he has, like how do I set up a business in Estonia? And then the search will direct him towards the right website, either at EU or national level, where he can find information about all these rules. And the important information here is also that all these websites that are going to be part of the gateway are only public websites managed by competent authorities. So the aim is also to have information that is highly reliable for the users. Then we have a second pillar for the gateway, which is about procedures. Here, in order to facilitate things for our citizens and businesses, the idea would be to make a number of procedures available online in all member states by the end of 2023. So in an annex to the regulation, there is a list of 21 procedures, which are procedures that are the most frequently used throughout Europe across borders. And all these 21 procedures will need to be made available fully online. And I'll come back to this in a minute. And then the third pillar of the gateway is this time addressing more assistance services. So we are speaking here about services that can provide personalized help to a user in case he has still difficulty to find information, or he has an issue with an authority for handling a specific procedure. In that case, we'll make available another feature on the Your portal, which we call the Assistance Service Finder. And this tool will guide the user, depending on his case, towards a service that can provide him with the best suited personalized help for his specific issue. Now, if we move to the next slide, you will see the list of the 21 procedures I mentioned before. So focusing now on this pillar regarding procedures, the idea is that those 21 procedures will need to be made available fully online by the end of 2023. And when I say fully online, it's really for the whole flow of the procedure, from the step where you need to authenticate yourself to the step where you might need to upload evidence or to make use of the once-only system, until the very end of the procedure where citizens and businesses will be able to get the output of the procedure also electronically. Now, as part of this work to digitalize procedures, if we can move to the next slide, one of the very important articles in the regulation is related with the idea of incorporating once only into this regulation. And so basically, if you want to refer to the regulation, it's detailed in Article 14. What is foreseen is that the Commission, together with Member States, establishes a technical system for the automated exchange of evidence across borders between authorities. In terms of scope, this will apply on the one hand to the procedures that you saw on the previous slide, so all the procedures that will have to be digitalized. And on the other hand, it will also apply to all evidence that is needed for procedures covered by 4 other directives, which were already foreseeing in the past the digitalization of procedures. And here we're speaking about the 2 directives on public procurement that were mentioned earlier this morning, about a directive on professional qualifications and the services directive. Now, of course, there are already some existing systems in specific areas that are covered by the gateway. We had a presentation on links with e-certis earlier this morning. So, of course, here the idea is that these existing systems can continue to exist. However, we're also in the process of working with the colleagues dealing with these existing systems to see whether we couldn't also build on them and maybe reuse some elements of it, like, for instance, in the case of e-certis for the evidence broker that we foresee for the once-only system. Next slide, please. Yes, so one of the requirements of the regulation is that this exchange is really automated and in real time, meaning that the user shouldn't go to the procedure and then come back to it 1 hour or 2 days later to be able to access the evidence, but all of this should be a continuous flow. And that's why the regulation is focusing on evidence, meaning either data or documents that are available already in an electronic format enabling this automated exchange. In addition to that, it was mentioned, I think, by Alenka and Robert already, the data protection features that are linked with that are extremely important. And that's why we have 2 specific provisions in the regulation to ensure the compliance with data protection rules and especially with the GDPR. On the one hand, there is a need to ask for an explicit request of the user to launch the once-only procedure. And that's to comply with the consent provision of the GDPR. And on the other hand, we have another provision that is foreseen, which is about the preview. So here the idea is that before the evidence can be used by the authority that needs it, The user should have the possibility to preview the evidence and then to choose either to continue with it and to allow the authority to use the data that is contained in it, or to stop the exchange and to upload the evidence by his own means in case, for instance, there is a specific information that is not correct, or the data that is covered by the evidence is wider than he would expect. Next slide, please. So this is what is foreseen in the regulation. The regulation was adopted in 2018. And since then, we have started some preparatory work, obviously, to start preparing for the development and the implementation of the system that should be ready by 2023. So for that purpose, first of all, last year, we proposed to member states a high-level architecture for the once-only system, very much building on what the TOOP project produced. This year, on the basis of this high-level architecture, we decided to go a bit more deeply into the different features of the system. And for that purpose, we launched a number of work packages to work more precisely on all the technical and operational specifications of the system. We launched so far 4 working groups. The first one is about technical design. So here, the idea is to build on the high-level architecture and to develop more specifically some specifications about the different components of the system. Then we have a second group, which is focusing on the authentication and record matching. So here as well, a very important element, as was mentioned during the panel before. We have a third group, which is dealing more with semantics. So here the idea is to identify or develop the data models that will be needed to make the system work. And then we have a fourth work package, which is a bit more transversal, which is about user centricity. And here, the idea is to work more on the user journey and to identify what will be the different steps through which the user will have to go to work with the system. And next slide, please. Yes, so these work packages have been launched at the spring this year. The intention now is to make sure that we get deliverables from all the work packages by the end of this year or the very beginning of next year. And on that basis, we'll start working on an implementing act, which should be ready by June next year. And this implementing act will aim especially at setting out all the technical and the operational arrangements in order for the system to work. Once this implementing act will be adopted, then we'll be able to start all the developments and testing phase with the objective to have the once-only system in place by the end of 2023. And if we go to my last slide now, I'd like to finish by especially highlighting the very good cooperation that we had with the TOOP project since the very beginning of the discussions on the SDG. I still remember some very fruitful discussions at the kickoff meeting of the project where we were still drafting the regulation and we got some very interesting inputs from all the members of TOOP on the once-only principle in general. We also got lots of support from several of your members throughout the negotiations to make it a bit more clear to all participants in the negotiations what are the technical options for the actual implementation of the system. And then, since I mentioned already, since last year, also super useful input for the high-level architecture, as well as for all the work strands that we have launched this year. So I think we can really say that now, on the one hand, with the legal requirements of the SDGR, and on the other hand, with all the technical work that you have done with TOOP, we are really holding all the cards to make this principal and operational system by the end of 2023.
Good. Thank you very much, Fleur. Thank you. Okay. Just give it a second there. If you did have a question, either we can get it now, or also, of course, you can just talk directly to Fleur, can directly answer in the chat. But we do need to move on. Where we apologize for being a little bit behind on our schedule here. So let's go on to our next talk right now. We're looking at the SDG from the once only principle. And to talk to us about that, we have Pim van der Eek and Martin Daniels. Pim and Martin, are you there?
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. Please take it away.
Pim van der Eek. I will start and Martin will finish the presentation.
Great.
So maybe you can go to my first slide. So there's a bit of a background who we are and how we fit into this picture. So we are all working towards this vision of a connected Europe. We want to establish a single market in the EU, which also includes a digital single market. And we know that there are still quite a lot of barriers that prevent this market from functioning. So we need to work in a number of areas. We've had presentations before from the TOOP project, which actually is the first area. We need to develop the concepts on how this interconnected Europe can function, especially for once-only data sharing. So therefore, we need pilots to develop these concepts and test them. We need regulation, such as the SDG regulation in particular, that Fleur just presented to you. So we have a clear and sound legal basis for this. In particular, the Article 14 that is mentioned is very specific on the functionality that it expects to be in place in 2023. But the third area, and this is the area where we from the CEF team and Digit fit in, we need a digital infrastructure to support the operation of this once-only principle when it is ready to be used in production. So this is an area where the CEF building blocks team provides its input. And these building blocks are already based. The aim is really to provide well-defined technical solutions and to establish interoperability. So in the next slide, a bit of an explanation about building blocks. I added the URL so you can find the OOP, the future OOP building block, and all the others. So building blocks are a concept that encompasses a number of elements. It includes specifications based on open standards. So we make sure systems can interoperate and can be implemented using open technologies. It may include software, but it also provides support services and community management. We are currently, as the CEF team in running a number of building blocks. Two of the main ones that you may know are EID and e-delivery, which have a basis in the eIDAS regulation. And similarly, we are now working together with the other DGs to develop a once-only principle building block, which is primarily based on the SDG regulation that was just mentioned. But just as e-delivery is being used also on a basis for exchanges that have a different legal basis than the eIDAS, we also keep in mind that we want to enable data sharing in a more general sense than just the data sharing that is defined in this specific article of the SDG regulation. So the OOP building block is being built right now, mainly focusing on the SDG requirements. But we want to be open for the future. As Christine mentioned this morning, member states are in different stages of digitization. And we know that the OOP system in a couple of years' time will be different than what it is today. So the way we are designing this system is intended to be future-proof, to also support more advanced types of once-only data sharing and also supporting the concepts that have been discussed of providing user control and more fine-grained exchanges. But the key factor is we want to support all member states, no matter where in the digital journey they are. So that's the background of the OOP building block. In the next slide, a bit of a background on how we have interacted with TOOP in the past and today, before I hand over to Martin, who will explain also the future. So we as CEF team have been working together with the TOOP project since it started. So when we started, there was no OOP building block being considered yet. But we work together closely on the use of e-delivery. And in those discussions with the TOOP technical team, we learned a lot about what they are doing and their sort of the architecture that they were developing and the concepts that they are designing. This collaboration increased in intensity in the summer of last year, since, as Fleur mentioned, we started this preparatory work to not only prepare the work for the SDG implementation, but also make sure that we can take advantage as much as possible from the outputs of the TOOP project, since it had been working for a couple of years and had adjusted its focus towards SDG as SDG became the new regulation. So we assessed the TOOP outputs and we also provided our feedback. And as a result of our feedback and through the discussions, we also evolved the outputs in a way that makes sure that it really is also meeting the requirements from the OOP system. So as was mentioned this morning, TOOP has done a lot of work in the last 6 months, more than maybe usual for a project in the last 6 months of a project. Many changes were made. There's a lot of additional work. So we are very pleased with that. Also, the TOOP architecture, when we started our work last year in discussions with member states, was the basis of what we call the blueprint, which was our main discussion document on finding consensus about what the technical system should do. And again, this was, since we could closely use the TOOP outputs, this gave us a massive head start. And as we have mentioned before, we would not be where we are today without the TOOP project, since we really got a head start. Also, in the current work that Fleur mentioned in our work packages that we have been running in the last, since the spring of this year, the TOOP project has supported us. They have done presentations of their work, and they have also listened to our inputs. So the specifications have been updated continuously. And we are now at a stage where we have actually requested for a subset of these outputs that they be made available to the future work in these work packages. And also as input for this future OOP building block. And in return, this will mean that we will also take charge of the maintenance of these specifications. So that is where we are today. In the next slide, Martin will explain you how we view the future.
Hi all, I'm Maarten Daniels, a member of both the CEF e-delivery technical team and the OOP building block architecture team. And I'll shortly present a recap of the current state of data sharing between public administrations and also provide an outlook to the future. Because in Europe and throughout the world, public administrations are actually gradually moving from a physical and analog model over a network and platforming model to reach actually a smart, data-driven model in the near future. And the work done by all colleagues in TOOP and related initiatives are contributing to this journey. We have the building blocks, CEF and DEP, that are rolling out the building blocks in the context of the CEF program, such as e-delivery, EID, etc., and which DEP will continue in the footsteps of the predecessor CEF. We have TOOP where the specifications are adopted as a baseline for the single digital gateway architecture and will continue to evolve there. We also have DE4A going beyond the scope of the current SDG regulation by specifying and piloting additional exchange patterns which are relevant for all public administrations in the member states. And then we have the EU-wide initiatives such as SDG, but also the European data spaces, as mentioned by President von der Leyen in her State of the Union, as one of the main priorities for the EU in the near future. So that's our presentation.
Okay, lovely. Thank you, gentlemen. Good. All right. So, again, if there are some questions, you can feel free to put them into the chat during the conversation. Sometimes a little bit difficult at the end of a talk just to jump up with the questions because we are moving on. But if you do put your questions in, we can always loop back to them later. Okay, we have 2 more presentations to go for today's TOOP session. Our next one, we're talking about the DE4A, and to do that, we've got Gerard Soisson. Gerard, are you there, sir?
Yes, I'm there. Does everybody hear me? Good afternoon to everybody.
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah. My name is Gérard Soisson. I'm head of EU and international affairs, so let's say international relations at Luxembourg Government IT Center. I'm also representing Luxembourg in the Digital Europe for All project. That's why I'm here in this function. But I'm also a coordinator in the SDG coordination group and active in various different other European committees or expert groups. Yes, so my mission here is to present you now shortly the project Digital Europe for All. So Digital Europe for All is an Horizon 2020 project, which means that it is also a research project, as Horizon 2020 is in the context are normally research projects, and so this means it has also to try to find new ways of doing once only and not only implement, for example, what is asked for in SDG. So it has to have perhaps a more future-oriented approach. Then the project has 8 million euros that are allocated. We have 10 member states participating and 24 partners. The project started in January 2020, and this will end in December 2022. We try, like I already said, on the one side, certainly to give input for what is asked for in the SDGR, but at the same time, what we are doing goes beyond this. So we are not only trying to find OOP solutions that could help in the context of SDGR, but we have a broader scope. And let's say we try to take into account a bigger picture, more holistic view, and also try to implement solutions that can be used outside of the context of Article 14 of SDGR, and that can perhaps be solutions that can be used in the future, like, for example, also verifiable credentials, testing what can be done with self-sovereign identity by using blockchain. And also we are using different patterns, not only one pattern like it is done in TOOP. What is also important to say is that Digital Europe for All is a member state-driven pilot. So the member states are really in the driving seat, and they try to find solutions that can correspond to their real needs and that take as far as possible in account the existing national solutions, and try to minimize also the additional burdens. So try to integrate existing solutions with what we are doing in at European level, not doing things twice and not having afterwards parallel infrastructures that would do more or less the same. We are also certainly have to comply with SDGR. This is an evidence. We take into account the EIF, the European Interoperability Framework, also the Tallinn Declaration, which is a ministerial declaration, political ministerial declaration of the different member states. In this context, there is a new declaration going on in the context of the German presidency, the Berlin Declaration, that will normally be adopted in December, and that will be certainly also be taken then into account. So the context, I already spoke a little bit on this about this topic. We certainly will build on what exists. That means STOC 2, EIDAS, but also ISA Square, eSense, but certainly also what is done in TOOP or in CEF. We will also try to take into account the bigger picture, the whole everything that is part of the landscape. So this means the different legislations, not only SDGR, but also EIDAS, also GDPR, which is a very important topic, the different political declarations, the strategies, the policies like Tallinn or other ones. Principles are defined in such strategies or political policy documents, like, for example, in the European Interoperability Framework, in the Tallinn Declaration, in the Gov Action Plan, etc. And more general, try to also define solutions that take into account European values and policies. This is a very important topic also now in the Berlin Declaration that is discussed on European level. How can we implement in our technical solutions the values that we are defending? This means also fundamental rights, privacy by design, protection of personal data, and not only say that we want to comply, but define solutions that by design on a technical level really manage to achieve these goals and to comply to these values, these fundamental rights. So to define a European way of doing digitalization and not to copy simply what is done in the United States or perhaps in states like China or other geographical geographic regions where fundamental rights is perhaps not always perfectly complied to. Then we have to check also the new technologies like blockchain or other technologies that could be of interest in the context of once only. We certainly then contribute also to realize European single market by doing this, but in a more larger sense, we also try to fulfill the needs of our users, our citizens, our enterprises by complying to user centricity and by complying to the fundamental rights that we have defined in our, for example, in Charter of Fundamental Rights, but also in other texts at European level. So our contributions will be, on the one side, to contribute to the Article 14, so what is strictly defined in SDGR, that is one of our missions. We will try to create a federated architecture. That means an architecture that takes into account the principle of subsidiarity and that leaves as much as possible on the member states, responsibility, and tries to centralize as only when this is absolutely necessary for technical reasons and cannot be done otherwise. But for the rest, we would certainly prefer to have solutions that build on what is done on a national level and that reuse this and for cross-border exchange. We also have a multi-pattern architecture. That means that we don't only have the intermediation pattern, but also other patterns, like, for example, a pattern using verifiable credentials or a notification subscription pattern, or a user-assisted pattern where the user directly authenticates to the data at the data provider side and can then directly get the evidence and decide to transfer it to the data requester. So we have not only one pattern, but several different patterns that can be used beyond and outside of also SDGR. Certainly, we have also, like in TOOP, semantic interoperability toolbox. We have certainly a data service database that is needed. Yeah, then, like I already said, we try to evaluate innovative technologies and establish or check their benefits for once only. Then next slide, perhaps the we have 3 real-life cross-border pilots that are implemented. I will afterwards present them more in detail. What is also important in our work is the recommendations made in Work Package 7 to legal recommendations to check the legal barriers, but also to find the right legal solutions for what is defined in the different regulations or directives, and to find solutions that comply to these different legal contexts and take into account the European level, but also the national legislation as far as possible. This is not as easy as this perhaps seems, because we have there some tensions between different regulations and between different texts. And also the policy principles like privacy by design could sometimes seem or are sometimes in some conflict with the once only principle. So we have to find solutions that at the same time guarantee things like privacy by design and allow us to make once only at the same moment. And we have to be innovative and to achieve this. Yeah, then sustainability is a very important topic of governance. So how will we manage these building blocks, these solutions once we have established them? How will we guarantee that they stay sustainable, that they can are also scalable? And how will we organize the governance and what for the member states is very important, so that the member states keep also the say and necessary say on this, the way these solutions works, because they will have a huge impact on digitalization on national level also. Now to present the pilots, we have the first pilot is studying abroad. Studying abroad is at the same time we have a procedure that is application for higher education, then the application for study grant, and also the diploma certificate studies and professional recognition. In this pilots, for example, we use also the verifiable credentials, so also the self-sovereign identity pattern. In the next pilot, that is doing business abroad, we have also patterns. We are using patterns like subscription and notification. This pattern is not perfectly, also what we are doing there is not perfectly what is described in Article 14 also, because we don't have really always the digital the obligations on the Article 14 here. And the procedures that are dealt with here are starting of business and digital annual reports. And then finally, the last of the pilots is in moving abroad. We are implementing or trying to implement the procedure resisting change of address. So what has to be done if a citizen goes from one member state to another? How can we apply once only in this context? And we also will try there to do this really truly once only way by also notifying automatically the member state where the citizen is coming from of this change of address, so that the user has really only to do one procedure and has not to register on one side and to deregister on in another member state. Certificates like birth certificate, death certificate, residence certificate are also part of this pilot. And finally, retiring. We are in this pilot implementing a user-assisted intermediation pattern. That means a pattern where the user will authenticate at the data provider side in the other member state to get directly the evidence from there, and then to be able to transfer it in the context of the procedure to the member state who needs it to the requesting member state. Yeah, then because I have nearly used my 15 minutes, like I already said, this slide is more or less presenting this idea. We are certainly working on the once only technical system defined in Article 14, but our scope is larger. And finally, we want to contribute to a larger European governmental interoperability platform that is already in discussion at member state level. And we would like to contribute elements, essential building blocks, or at least help to define building blocks that could contribute to such a larger interoperability platform that would go beyond the once only technical system. Now, next slide, perhaps. Yeah, this is, I will not go in detail in this, present this picture, but you can also see if you take a fast look that we have there different patterns on the left side. We are using IRA to describe the different services that we provide, and we certainly build on existing building blocks like eIDAS e-delivery or Descartes CPSV as far as possible in the context of our project. So now nearly the last slide. Next one, please. So here you have the overview of the different partners. Atos, the project is coordinated by Atos, which are located in Spain. Yeah, and now finally, as very last slide, we have just my contact data. So if you have any question, you can contact me, but you can also contact the project coordinators where you find the contents of the previous slide. Thanks for your attention, and yeah.
Okay, thank you, Yarad. Thank you. So we're coming to the end of it today. There was a question there. Is this a good question? Look, we'll kind of get to that one as we move on, because we do need to move on. We can answer that one in the chat. We have our final wrap up now. We're talking about the handover to Seth. So I'd like to invite back Robert Grimmer and also Joel Rodriguez Ferrare from Digit. There you are, gentlemen.
I'm here.
Please
Hello.
take it away.
Hello, great. So then, please, next slide. I think this is going to be our final moment. It's going to be the big celebration. We should have the big drums on. Yeah, okay. No, I mean, let's just go for it. So we have described as part of our project the TOOP solution architecture, which is accessible publicly on our TOOP wiki, where we actually have a subtree for the Ceph OP handover edition that includes 4 main parts: the criterion and evidence type rule base, the data services directory, and the semantic repository, as well as the registry of authorities. That's the core part that all the partners, all the beneficiaries of the TOOP project have licensed that by an unanimous vote on the 11th of September in our General Assembly to the European Commission. And with that, I would like to move right to the next slide. We're basically handing over the results of TOOP to the Connecting Europe facility and Digit. And with that, I just want to hope that you cherish our baby very well and let it grow even bigger. Joao, you have the room. Door.
Yeah, I am muted myself. So Robert, I think you have to mute because people were saying that there was a nasty echo. So I hope now it's better. I will not really use the slides because I don't want to keep, let's say, people waiting. I want just to pass a couple of simple messages. So when we met the first time, Robert, I don't know if you remember, Back in 2016 in Estonia for the kickoff meeting, I brought one simple message. And the message was, if you remember, please reuse the building blocks. Don't reinvent the wheel. They are there for you guys to start working. And if you can reuse them, we would be extremely happy to see it happen. And that was the message in 2016. Fast forward to today, 4 years later, a lot has happened. And my message today is thank you, really big thank you for having reused the building blocks, but not only having done that, but also having, I think, used them in a very smart way. You have adapted some of the things that we were thinking to do. You have definitely contributed a lot. And this is where you are leaving, let's say, the train with a lot of work done, a lot of work built on top of things that other projects had already delivered, such as eSANS. So you did an amazing job. I think this conference showed all the progress that was made in the last years, where we stand today, and that the ambition is greater than ever. So we have a lot of responsibility, and to me it's really an honor to close the event because we as European Commission, and I'm of course here with my colleagues from DG Connect, I come from DG Digit, there's DG Grow, we feel that we need to continue to work together, and that's really the message here. So this is not the end, this is to be continued. This is not really an handover. We will continue to work together on all the elements that you guys have delivered. We will develop them further. We will make the SDG happen. We are invested in that. We have now also the E4A to help us. So we can only make this a reality if we work together. So this is not to close the event, but this is an open invitation to everyone to continue to contribute. And also a big thank you, Robert, to all the team in TOOP. And these 4 years have been extremely fruitful. And I hope that they have been also fruitful at personal level to all of you. And we will definitely continue to work together on the SDG, but probably also in other projects. So big thank you. And I hope that everyone goes, out of this event with a lot of knowledge and the links necessary to continue following your work and our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joao, for the kind words. And I would like to pass them directly on to my team and to the large TOOP family that we've built over the time, the colleagues from the management board, and everyone in the beneficiaries and the partners. I mean, you saw the large number. I mean, 23 beneficiaries, 23 countries, over 50 partners. It has been truly a large-scale pilot. We have covered almost all of Europe, not fully, but that might be then for the future projects. And thank you all, and thank you, colleagues from DG Connect, DG Digit, DG Grow, and all the other helpful persons and partners and organizations. We're not fully at the end. We still have 4 months to really wrap up and make everything a nice package, and we'll do so, and it has been a great journey.
Thank you again.
Very nice. Thank you, gentlemen. Okay, that is the end of our web conference for today for TOOP, telling you how things have been going and what some of the ideas and the ways forward for the future are. I'd like to thank everyone for listening. Thank you very much for your time. We know that you are very busy, and we appreciate you listening in. We also want to thank the organizing team behind this who put it all together, all the slides, all the WebEx, everything. It's certainly not easy to put together these conferences these days. So congratulations to the organizing team for making this happen. So thank you to all the speakers. And if you would like some more information, you can put, we will still have people here in the chat for a while. If you have more questions for what you've heard today, we're working on getting up the slides. We're working on getting up the video. So thank you very much. My name's Lewis. And if you are so interested in such things, I'll be hosting the X-Road community event tomorrow. It is very much related to these technologies. So if you will be on the X-Road community event tomorrow, I'll see you then. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Louis. See you tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a good lunch.
Bye, you too.
Bye-bye. Thank you for everything.
Bye-bye.